Chapter 478. Wang Lu did not see with his own eyes how the Supreme of the Demon Realm transformed into hundreds of incarnations, descended to the cities of the Demon Realm, and crushed the army of the dead with supreme power. Because before the great Demon King's incarnation arrived, he had already been ejected by the system. When the Black Tide arrived, he released a worldwide spell. Wang Lu only lasted for a moment in the Supreme Land before he was ejected by the system. He was ejected to protect himself because the moment Wang Lu left, the Supreme Land was crushed into pieces. The fall of the Supreme Land stunned Wang Lu for a moment, and then he laughed. The Supreme Land was actually the administrator's account, and because of Wang Lu's violent operation, the system was in chaos, and even the administrator's account was crushed. This meant that the new demon realm had entered an unprecedented state of chaos. No one could manipulate this dream at will, and the spells that had been forcibly added to make up for the peace had also been broken. The instincts that had been suppressed for 2,000 years began to return, and the residents of the new demon realm could respond correctly at the first moment. If it was the new demon realm in a normal state, when faced with the sky full of dead souls, the first reaction would be to find someone to greet them and invite them to their home as a guest. Only when the blood of the dead flowed like a river would they remember to resist bravely, and the resistance would be limited to self-defense, and they would never take the initiative to attack. A race that had been peaceful for 2,000 years would be so slow to this point. But thanks to the collapse of the Supreme Land, the shackles in the hearts of the demons were broken so they could respond correctly like the real demons. No matter who they were, where they came from, since they were not pleasing to the eye and might be a threat to themselves, then they would crush them first. As for the negotiation, they would wait until the opponent was beaten to the point where they could not fight back, and their murderous nature had been mostly vented. Wang Lu did not see the subsequent development of the new demon realm, but he could more or less guess. The two great demon kings were powerhouses of the supreme level, and the demon lords and demon generals under their command were also elite troops. In addition, the new demon realm had 2,000 years of accumulation, so they still had the power to resist the Black Dynasty. Although it would be difficult at the beginning, the situation would become smoother as time went on. After all, the source of the Black Tide had been cut off. Of course, when it came to the change of a world, Wang Lu could not predict it with 100% accuracy. Perhaps later on, the Black Tide would have a new change and in turn, it would devour the new demon world. But until this point, Wang Lu had done his best. Next, we can finally go home, right? Wang Lu stood up from the mountain of corpses, dusted off the corpse energy on his clothes and prepared to go home. The new demon world had been messed up by him, so the space blockade had weakened. Now, he could feel the location of 9 regions through the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman. Although it was difficult to directly penetrate the multi-layer space barrier and return to 9 regions with just one Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman alone, but he had more than one Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman in his hand. Wang Lu took out all the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talismans from his mustard seed bag and lined them up in a row. Without being stimulated, the immortal spirit energy contained in them was connected into a bundle, bursting out with amazing power. Humph, if Wang Wu saw this, she probably wouldn't be able to resist it for even a moment. She would immediately kneel down and beg me to share half of it with her. While saying that, Wang Lu took back 5 of them. According to his estimation, when the space barrier had been completely loosened, returning to 9 regions didn't need to be so wasteful. 5 heavenly talismans were more than enough. If he used too many, it might brew space turbulence, which would have the opposite effect. The next thing to do is to think about how to explain it to the sect's elders. Wang Lu's trip to the demon world was strongly supported by the sect. Whether it was the painstaking special training of Elder Lu Li or the special materials prepared for him by the Heavenly Sword Hall, behind all of these were actually the sect's deep expectations for his trip to the demon world. They were looking forward to his growth and also looking forward to his harvest in the demon world. However, at this time, it seemed that if he wanted to say growth, there was not much growth. In total, his trip to the demon world lasted for less than a month, and he didn't even fight against a few decent opponents. Of course, it was difficult for him to make great progress. However, when it came to the harvest, it was very rich. The scroll that recorded the dream-building technique alone could be called priceless. Although Wang Lu himself didn't like it, there were so many inner and outer court disciples in Spirit Sword Mountain, so there would always be someone suitable for cultivation. In addition, the demon jade was also a priceless treasure. Even without the assistance of the eternal tree, it had lost most of its effect, but its structure still contained a high research value. Then it successfully resolved a major disaster for 9 regions, which was a boundless merit. Finally, witnessing the experience and lessons of the demon race in the past 2,000 years, would also be of great benefit to the people of 9 regions. Wang Lu intended to go back and write a book. The title of the book was Be Prepared for Danger in Times of Peace, 2,000 Years Sacrifice for the Fall of the Demon World. Then, in the book he intended to reveal some secrets in due time, such as the existence of the 3,000 great worlds, such as the fall of the demon race, such as an unknown threat that made Dixian afraid and the immortals and demons joined hands to face. He believed that there must be people in 9 regions who already knew these secrets. For example, the several elders of Heavenly Sword Hall should know more than him, but they were good at pretending to be stupid. However, these big shots would always have a reason not to reveal these secrets. That being the case, he would do it himself. He was the lead disciple of Spirit Sword Sect. Although he was already a Taoist master of the King Pill, he had been cultivating for less than 30 years, so he was still a junior in the immortal cultivation world. There were many things that he could do without scruples. Moreover, if some things were really secrets that couldn't be said, then as the lead disciple, he should be told in advance. The more secrets that couldn't be said, the more they couldn't be concealed. Thinking of this, Wang Lu wanted to laugh out loud. It had been a long time since his mind was so scattered. The excitement of going home could not be suppressed. Then Wang Lu took a deep breath and stimulated the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman. According to the effect of the Heavenly Talisman, as long as he could pass through the layers of void and return to the 9 regions. After the Heavenly Talisman flashed, the scene in front of Wang Lu quickly distorted. According to his past experience, the scene in front of him would first shrink to a point, and then quickly unfold. And the unfolded scene should be the non-phase peak of Spirit Sword Sect. But when the scene of the demon world was reduced to a point, Wang Lu suddenly felt that his line of sight was a bit blurred. A dark cloud floated over from nowhere and covered that point. This time Wang Lu was shocked. The space conversion caused by the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman was actually disturbed by an external force? What kind of means could interfere with the operation of the Heavenly Talisman? Moreover, this dark cloud came and went like a ghost and he didn't notice it at all. Was there an expert who deliberately plotted against him, or did he miss something when he calculated the way back home? No, the most important question now was, if the space conversion process was disturbed, could he still go back? The worst-case scenario was that he would be lost in the void forever. If he was lucky, he would be transferred to any place in 9 regions. Of course, it was not too good because there were many mysterious places in 9 regions, and the cultivation base of King Pill was not particularly safe. Therefore, when Wang Lu noticed the abnormality, he immediately took out the 5 spare talismans. As soon as there was an obvious problem, he would immediately activate it and open another space passage. The next moment, the contracted space point stretched again. Wang Lu was slightly stunned and then put down his hand. Because the scene that unfolded was a piece of green mountains and clear water, and the surrounding was filled with light and abundant spiritual energy. Although he didn't recognize where it was, it must be somewhere in 9 regions. It seemed that although the process of the spatial transformation was disrupted, there were no major mistakes. As long as he returned to 9 regions, the problem would be mostly solved. Because as long as he was still in 9 regions, the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman was a trustworthy life-saving talisman. And Wang Lu didn't hesitate. After seeing the scene clearly, he immediately took out a Heavenly Talisman and stimulated its magical power. He saw the Heavenly Talisman in his hand break into thousands of starlight spots like broken glass, and then a whirlpool of immortal spirit energy rolled up, and then, it dispersed and disappeared without a trace. There was no familiar non-phase peak, nor the familiar Blue River region. Even without the space conversion, this Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman was just wasted. Wang Lu was very surprised. He quickly took out another Heavenly Talisman, but he didn't use it. Instead, he sank his primordial spirit into the talisman paper to sense the coordinates of the non-phase peak recorded in the talisman paper. After a while he got nothing. Thus, the reason for the failure of the Heavenly Talisman was found. The Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman couldn't find the location of the non-phase peak, so naturally, it couldn't convert the space and send Wang Lu back. But why couldn't it find the non-phase peak? As long as it was within the scope of 9 regions, unless a true immortal came down to Earth, even the sect leaders of the major sects would find it difficult to interfere with the coordinate locking of the Heavenly Talisman. In particular, in the past 2 years, the Heavenly Sword Hall upgraded the Heavenly Talisman, which encrypted the coordinate recording function, which completely eliminated the interference with the operation of the Heavenly Talisman that Wang Lu encountered in the battle against the Beastmaster School on the Grand Cloud Mountain. So, who was stopping him from returning to Spirit Sword Mountain? Was it because of the previous Black Mist interference? Or was there someone behind the scenes, such as the Demon King who should have been buried together with the old demon world 2,000 years ago? For a time, the questions in Wang Lu's mind were almost mixed up. The questions came out one after another, but he couldn't find a clue to solve them. What was worse was that he couldn't even determine the current situation. Although the surroundings seemed to be full of birds and fragrant flowers, to be able to make the spirit sword heavenly talisman completely unable to sense the non-phase peak. This was comparable to the treatment of the demon world. Wang Lu searched for what he had learned, but still couldn't find a reasonable explanation. Could it be that he was really swept away by the turbulent space to the other 3,000 great worlds? If that was the case. While he was thinking, suddenly, there was a sound of footsteps in the distance. The so-called distance was really far away. Even with Wang Lu's hearing, it was still a bit blurry. The distance between them was at least 5 kilometers. However, the voices of those people were clearly distinguishable. Eldest brother, do we still have to go deeper? Why don't we take a rest here first? Lu Li, the experiential learning organized by the sect is not for us to come to the savage land for an outing. If we don't go deep into danger, how can we make progress? The only hope for the sect to rise in the next 100 years is us. As a member of the Golden Generation, you must not fall behind. Chapter 479. Wang Lu felt that his worldview was in danger of collapsing. Since his debut, Wang Lu could be considered to have seen a lot of things. Although his cultivation base had just reached the King Pill stage, his vision had already surpassed many Yuanying stage and even deity stage cultivators. The Golden King of the Western continent was a powerhouse who had surpassed the level of Holy One and embarked on the road to godhood. Wang Lu talked and laughed wittily with him. The gatekeeper of the group of immortal tombs, the ancient sword demon, who opened the road to immortality for the cultivators of a region, and Wang Lu had a battle of wits and courage with him. Then there was the trip to the demon world, where he single-handedly resolved the crisis of the Black Tide. The legend of Wang Lu's experience had far surpassed that of the vast majority of cultivators in 9 regions. However, perhaps the world was really full of strange things. The sages once said that in the world, there would always be people and things that would make your worldview collapse. And now Wang Lu finally deeply realized this truth. Listening to the conversation of the group of cultivators from 100 miles away, he suddenly felt that his imagination seemed to be a bit insufficient. Lu Li? Golden Generation? The Savage Land? If it was just one of them, it might be a coincidence, but when the 3 of them were linked together, no matter how he thought about it, there was only one result. The management training program of Lingjian School. Things started from 200 years ago. At that time, Lingjian School was in its darkest and lowest period since its establishment. During this period, it was even repeatedly proposed by the members of the Wanxian League to downgrade its grade and expel it from the 5 uniques. The several assemblies and votes were also based on the astonishing achievements of Lingjian School during the Second Great War of Immortals and Demons 2,000 years ago. However, the number of votes for the proposal was getting closer and closer. However, as the saying goes, when things reach an extreme, they will move in the opposite direction. Since then, Lingjian School seemed to be blessed by the heaven and had one fortuitous encounter after another. First, several of the great elders broke through the bottleneck of their cultivation base and became the influential giants in the immortal cultivation world. The power of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League was completely stabilized. At the same time, the younger generation was full of talents, and some of them were even praised by the elders of the Heavenly Sword Hall as having unprecedented aptitude. They were known as the Golden Generation of Lingjian School, and the sect had high hopes for them. Whether or not Lingjian School could rise from the weakest of the 5 uniques, the key lay in the development of the Golden Generation. After all, the potential of the elders was limited, and they did not have much lifespan left. Whether the Lingjian School could advance further still depended on the performance of the young people. In order to let the Golden Generation display their talents, the elders of the Lingjian School could be said to have painstaking efforts. They poured all their efforts into this group of cultivators, sparing no expense to let them grow as soon as possible. After all, before this, the Lingjian School had been suppressed for too long. However, this eagerness finally went to the extreme and produced a counterproductive effect. 150 years ago, the lead disciple of the sect at that time achieved great success in the King Pill, and several of his junior brothers and sisters had also reached peak Shudan stage, only one step away from the King Pill. Moreover, their real strength was far better than the ordinary King Pill. At this time, the elders of the sect very radically proposed a management trainee program, hoping to stimulate the further growth of these disciples. The so-called management trainee program was to send the Golden Generation to the Savage Land, expand the territory in that uncivilized land, and establish the power of the Lingjian school. Each of the disciples would assume sole responsibility in this process and become the ruler who controlled the land. This was also the first part of the ambitious grand strategy of the elders of Spirit Sword sect at that time. At that time, the Lingjian school was sparsely populated, and its resources were poor. The school's wealth accumulation and sphere of influence were even inferior to some middle-rank sections. However, this problem could not be solved by relying on a few talented disciples to advance by leaps and bounds in the path of immortal cultivation. After all, no matter how high an individual's cultivation base was, it was only an individual matter and could not benefit the sect. Therefore, at that time, the elders of Spirit Sword sect formulated a 100-year strategy, the first part of which was the management trainee program. The elders planned to use 20 years to let the golden generation become the sole ruler, and then transfer most of them back from the savage land to the 9 regions. After that, the Lingjian school would be backed by the developed savage land, which could absorb its rich resources. In front of them, under the guidance of the elders, a group of elite disciples would expand the territory for the sect. After 100 years, the Lingjian school would completely control the Blue River region and have its own forces in the 9 regions. If everything went well, they could even compete with Xingjing's sect. Even if it didn't go well, at least they could get rid of the current predicament. The elders of Spirit Sword sect had poured all their efforts into this 100-year strategy, which contained their inner depression of witnessing the decline of Spirit Sword sect for many years, as well as their yearning for the rise of Spirit Sword sect. However, at this time, they had to sigh with emotion that their strategy was too radical. Putting the hope of a 5 unique sect on a group of young people with at most 50 to 60 years of cultivation was simply like pulling a seedling to help it grow. Even if the golden generation at that time repeatedly created miracles and constantly refreshed people's expectations of them, it didn't mean that they were omnipotent. In fact, a large part of them had already overdrawn their potential. There was a limit to one's strength. When a sect overdrafted its disciples, the magnificent edifice would collapse with a loud bang. Wang Lu still didn't understand the specific process, but he at least knew that the golden generation of the Lingjian school was nearly wiped out in the management trainee program. Hundreds of talented disciples fell, and among the cultivators of the same generation, there were only 10 Heavenly Sword Hall elders left. One of them had been living in seclusion and had never shown up until now. What was even more tragic was that, although his masters had never mentioned it, there was a very obvious phenomenon. Other sects, from Xingjing sect to some low-rank sects, all had their own elders. Only Lingjian school didn't. Feng Yin Taoist master, who had only cultivated for more than 200 years, was the most senior person in the sect. In other words, the fall of the golden generation was accompanied by the elders of Spirit Sword sect. More than 100 years ago, it was still a mystery what kind of tragic disaster the Spirit Sword sect encountered during their pioneering operation in the Savage Land. Over the years, whether it was from the inside of the sect or with the help of the external forces of the Wanxian League, Wang Lu had found nothing. Later on, he lost interest in continuing to explore. After all, it was a tragedy that the elders of the sect did not want to mention, so why would he bother to open that scar? Unexpectedly, now that he had given up exploring the secret, he appeared in front of him. The group of young cultivators who were walking hundreds of miles away sounded like the golden generation of the Lingjian school. In other words, the failure of the transfer of Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman actually sent him to more than 100 years ago? Did he complete the time travel? No. This was a big deal, so he had to seriously confirm it. After all, the more absurd the speculation, the more cautious it was. Thereupon, Wang Lu closed his breath and concentrated his mind. He then used his hearing ability to carefully listen to the conversation 5 miles away. In short, Lu Li, since you've come to the Savage Land, you must forge ahead and not waste your talent. Big brother, you're overflowing with talent and omnipotent, but I'm just a mortal. Haha, junior brother Lu Li, you're naughty again. We're both members of the first echelon of this generation, so there's no qualitative difference in the aptitude and perception between us. How could there be a genius and a mortal? What you lack are nothing more than 2 things. First, focus. You have too many distractions. You have to learn talismans, you have to learn array formations, you have to learn blacksmithing, you have to learn everything that the elders of the sect can teach you. Even if your perception is amazing, if you're distracted, your cultivation speed naturally can't catch up with mine. Second, you don't have enough confidence. Because you have too many distractions, your cultivation speed is lacking compared to other junior brothers and sisters. You feel ashamed of your inferiority, so you even give up treatment and begin to be more obsessed with the cultivation of miscellaneous things, in order to find the balance. But the more you do this, the slower your cultivation on the right path is, until today. Damn, big brother, please spare me? I'm just being polite to you, but you actually talk incessantly and even expose my sore spot. Is there a senior brother like you? Do you mind? It should be okay, your crushed junior sister Mu Ying is in the other team so she can't hear these words. Damn, Luli, you actually have a crush on Mu Ying? Big news. Big brother? Ah? You can't even tell me about your crush? But that day I saw you and Yun singing loudly after getting drunk. You said everything, so I thought you didn't care about it anymore. Hey Luli, you actually drank and sang with senior sister Yun? Big brother? Okay, I won't say anything. Don't be angry, I just want to encourage you. It's rare for us to be in the same team, and for the next 10 years, we will be together day and night. We will overcome the thorns and thorns together in this barren land, so you must be motivated. Big brother, don't worry, I am very motivated now, and I can't wait to reach the nascent soul realm. Your Shudan foundation is still not stable. Although it is good to be motivated, why are you so anxious to reach the nascent soul realm? Because only when I reach the nascent soul realm can I beat you, King Pill bitch. Junior brother, you are being naughty again. With how many distractions you have, even if you reach the nascent soul realm, you still can't beat me. I am going to kill you now. Yes, you are right, they should be people from Lingjian school. 5 miles away, Wang Lu gently nodded, confirming his guess. Although he didn't know the other 7 people in this group of 8 except for Lu Li, this style of conversation should be unique to Lingjian school. Moreover, the elder Lu Li that Wang Lu was familiar with was an expert at the peak of the nascent soul realm, but at this time elder Lu Li was only at the Shudan realm. If it wasn't for the old man's recent excessive indulgence, which caused his cultivation to drop sharply, it could only be attributed to time traveling back to the past. The result is really time traveling, and it is more than 100 years at once. But it is a pity that I didn't get the bonus plug-in for time traveling. Wang Lu sighed and then prepared to get up and leave. Marshal Uncle Lu Li and the others were moving very fast, and their goal was in the direction where he was standing. But Wang Lu didn't intend to meet them so early. This time traveling was too bizarre, and the principle was completely unexplainable. Wang Lu didn't intend to make any mistakes because of the disordered time and space. In the stories of time traveling that he knew, there was no lack of time travelers who came into contact with their predecessors, and the predecessors suddenly disappeared. As a result, history was greatly changed and red demons wreaked havoc in the world. If this caused Elder Lu Li to disappear because of this reason, he would be guilty. However, just as Wang Lu stood up, he suddenly heard a curious voice in his ears. "Excuse me, what did you mean by time traveling just now?" Turning around, he saw a handsome young cultivator wearing a red and white robe that was 70 to 80% similar to his, standing there with a curious look on his face. Wang Lu was startled because he had just heard this voice. It was the current chief disciple of Lingjian school, who was supposed to be 5 miles away. This encounter really came a little too fast. Chapter 480. This sudden encounter made Wang Lu very surprised. The previous moment the other party was still 5 miles away, and the next moment he was already in front of him. Moreover, he didn't even notice it. This kind of method was indeed a bit fierce. Although Wang Lu had never been known for his keen perception, and at this time he had just experienced the time and space transformation, so his consciousness was somewhat fuzzy, but as the lead disciple of Lingjian school, even if it was his shortcoming in immortal cultivation, it was still above average. However, the other party was actually able to completely hide from his perception and approach him. The strength of this golden generation big brother could not help but secretly surprise Wang Lu. From the faint magical power fluctuation that the other party emitted, his cultivation base was similar to his own. Both of them were low-rank King Pill, and his magical power was extremely vigorous, 10 times better than the ordinary King Pill, which was also similar to his own. Although Wang Lu couldn't see through his cultivation method for a moment, he expected that it would not be an ordinary one. At the same time, his temperament was as sharp as a sword, but it did not appear to be threatening, showing that his attainment in the way of the sword had reached the realm of following his heart's desire. The sharpness of the way of the sword could be freely controlled. And this was a realm that many Yuanying stage sword cultivators had not mastered. Sure enough, he was indeed worthy to be the big brother of the golden generation of Lingjian school. At least he was not under Xingjing sect's Zhonghua Ferry. While Wang Lu was carefully looking at the other party was also looking at him. After just a few glances he was full of surprise. "Who exactly are you, Your Excellency? Your dress seems to have a lot of relationship with my Lingjian school. Although your cultivation method is strange, It faintly has the characteristics of my Lingjian school. You should clearly be a disciple of Spirit Sword sect. But I've never seen you in the dozens of years of immortal cultivation. After finishing his words, Wang Lu was also surprised. His clothes were similar to the man's. Lingjian school didn't pay much attention to the school's uniform for more than 100 years. The basic framework of the true disciple's uniform had never changed. The difference between his clothes and the man's was only a little bit. The key was, how did he know that the martial arts he practiced had a lot to do with Lingjian school? Although he did cultivate in Spirit Sword Mountain for decades, and most of the content he learned was taught by the elders of Spirit Sword sect, the main body of the method system was Primal Chaos Heaven-Splitting Sword Qi, which was inherited from the ancient sword demon and had nothing to do with the Lingjian school. Although the other non-phase method was an authentic Spirit Sword method, it was created by his master Wang Wu, which also had little to do with the Lingjian school's heritage. As for the other miscellaneous arts such as the Tao of formations and talismans, he had not dabbled in them yet, so they would not affect the main body of his cultivation technique. Judging from the fluctuation of magical power alone, he had almost no connection with Lingjian school, but how could he determine that he was a disciple of Spirit Sword sect? While Wang Lu was still in a state of amazement, that big brother continued to infer, in theory you are a disciple of Spirit Sword sect, but the main body of your cultivation method is not passed down by Spirit Sword sect. Your age should be younger than me by a few years, but the realm of your Fa Li is not below mine. This kind of amazing talent should not be unknown, and with this kind of aptitude, you should have learned the sect's supreme stellar sword mantra. But now it seems, I say, could it be that you are the illegitimate child of the sect leader? The big brother suspiciously looked at Wang Lu, and after a long time, he suddenly patted his head. Sorry, I'm talking to myself again. This is an old problem, please don't remember it. Before I forgot to introduce myself. I am the lead disciple of Lingjian school Ouyang Shang. May I know your honorable name? Surname Wang, given name Lu, I'm that. Speaking of his origin, Wang Lu suddenly felt that it was a bit difficult to explain. However, before Wang Lu could finish his words, Ouyang Shang laughed and patted him on the shoulder. It's okay. Your identity is particularly sensitive, so it's okay if it's inconvenient to say it. As long as we have a tacit understanding, it's fine. Haha, I didn't expect that sect leader, that serious old guy, actually knows how to live a good life. Wang Lu thought for a moment and felt that based on the current situation, acting as the illegitimate child of the sect leader seemed to be not bad. Although there were certainly many things that couldn't be explained with the temperament of this big brother of Spirit Sword sect, the next development would certainly be like this. Haha, let me introduce to everyone, this is the illegitimate child of our sect leader, junior brother Wang Lu. This time he came to participate in the management trainee program with us. His identity is particularly sensitive, so I hope that everyone can take care of him. Don't ask about things that shouldn't be asked. Since we are all from Spirit Sword sect, we must live in harmony and make contributions together in this savage land. Then, the other people could only hold back their curiosity and force themselves to live in harmony with him and make contributions together. In this way, although there would be a lot of awkwardness, it would reduce a lot of trouble. For example, why would there suddenly be one more person in the management trainee program of Lingjian school? In the savage land, which was regarded as the back garden of Lingjian school, why would there be an unfamiliar king pill? Now, it could be explained with the reason of the illegitimate child of the sect leader. Although they didn't know whether this big brother Ouyang Shang came up with this explanation intentionally or unintentionally, but since it was useful, then let's just use it. A moment later, the other 7 people arrived on their flying swords. In the team, the young Luli was among them. Different from the later 6th elder, who had a distinct black and white beard, at this time, Luli still looked extremely inexperienced. His miscellaneous knowledge had not yet been thoroughly mastered, which could be seen from his clothes. On his black and white robe, there were all kinds of ornaments hanging endlessly. In addition to the 3 mustard seed bags on his waist, there was also a dirty abacus, 2 withered oranges, and a small totem composed of feathers and animal bones. It could be seen that at this time, Luli had learned a lot of miscellaneous knowledge, which made people unable to restrain themselves from laughing. The leader of the team was a girl in a red and white dress. She had a gorgeous appearance and a generous temperament. While still in midair, she frowned and loudly complained, "Big brother, don't be so elusive, Uncle sect leader didn't teach you the earth shrinking technique to scare people." "Hey, who is this? Why does he look like you?" The several people behind the girl also showed a puzzled expression. The big brother Ouyang Shang laughed out loud and clearly. "Haha, let me introduce him to everyone. This is the illegitimate child of our sect leader, junior brother Wang Lu. This time he came to participate in the management trainee program with us. His identity is particularly sensitive, so I hope everyone can take care of him. Don't ask about things that shouldn't be asked. Since we are all from Spirit Sword sect, we must live in harmony and make contributions together in this savage land. Then, the 7 junior brothers and sisters showed a twisted expression as if they were constipated. The gorgeous girl couldn't help but take half a step forward and asked, "Big brother, this person is obviously..." Before she could finish, a hand appeared on the girl's head, rubbing her slightly fluffy curly hair. Ouyang Shang, with a generous elder's attitude, softly said, "Kai Xia, be good, don't make things difficult for others." The cheeks of the girl named Kai Xia immediately turned red. There was a bit of shyness but also a bit of anger. Being touched by her big brother Ouyang Shang, no matter how angry she was, she couldn't vent it. Finally, she angrily stomped her foot and then turned around to go back. Ouyang Shang's smile was also a bit twisted. Just now, Kai Xia stomped her foot. This junior sister who cultivated fiery sword had always been straightforward and fiery. Moreover, her attack power was really amazing. His foot most likely needed to be nurtured. In short, we now have a strong support. Although junior brother Wang Lu is young, his strength is outstanding, and he has already achieved King Pill. With such a strong support, I believe that our next wasteland reclamation operation will be smoother. Therefore, I decided to make a little modification to the plan. Instead of camping in Western Mountain Jade Forest, we will go to Blessed Fountain. As a result, the junior brothers and sisters didn't have the time to be curious that this young man named Wang Lu was actually the Taoist master of King Pill before they were stunned by Ouyang Shang's words. A tall male cultivator widened his eyes and asked, "Wait a minute, instead of camping in Jade Forest, we will go to Blessed Fountain? Big brother, can't you be a bit more reliable? Camping in Jade Forest is already very risky, going to Blessed Fountain is just courting death. It is said that there is a gathering place of the 1,000-year-old flood dragon over there." Ouyang Shang said with a smile, "It's just a 1,000-year-old flood dragon, what's so great about it? F***ck, if you think it's nothing, then why don't you fight one-on-one for us to see? You've just achieved King Pill and you're already so arrogant. When you reach Yuanying stage, you will definitely go and provoke the heavenly tribulation to seek ascension." Junior sister Kai Xia, don't be so irritable. I know that the strength of the 1,000-year-old flood dragon is comparable to that of a Yuanying stage-old monster. With our team alone we can barely resist it. Considering that there are still shrimp soldiers and crab generals under the flood dragon's command, we will undoubtedly lose. However, that's only considering the 8 of us. Now that we have junior brother Wang Lu, our chance of winning is more than 70%. Considering that we are all the sect's elites, it is likely that some of us will have a breakthrough in the battle. Counting this part, our chance of winning is more than 90%. If we don't dare to bet even if we have 90% chance of winning, then we don't need to come to the savage land to explore the land, we can just directly go into seclusion in the sect. Hey, how can you be so wishful thinking? With just one more person you've already changed from certain defeat to 90% chance of winning. Do you think junior brother Wang Lu is an elder of Spirit Sword sect? Junior sister Kai Xia, you have to believe in the power of academia. My conclusion is strictly and accurately calculated. If you think it's wrong, you're welcome to check it. With that, Ouyang Shang stretched out his hand and summoned more than 100 calculation talismans and then sent them to Kai Xia. When the girl saw them, she immediately felt dizzy. She hastily waved her hand and said, "Forget it, you're the big brother, whatever you say is right, okay?" While Ouyang Shang and Kai Xia were quarreling, Wang Lu was lost in thought. There were too many mysteries in time travel. For example, right now Wang Lu was very curious about one thing. If before they met him, Ouyang Shang and the others were planning to camp in a place called Jade Forest, then now it seemed that they had changed their destination to Blessed Fountain. Then history was likely to have changed. If history could be changed, then, could the tragedy of the golden generation of Lingjian School be avoided? If that could be done, then would there still be him, the lead disciple of Spirit Sword sect? Chapter 481. All kinds of conjectures about time and space were not uncommon in 9 regions. From the supreme cultivators whose cultivation base was close to ascending to immortality to the tea-house storytellers who loved imagination, they all had their own conjectures about time and space. Of course, it was just a conjecture because even the most brilliant cultivator could not manipulate time on a large scale. A cup of immortal tea was the legend and myth of cultivators, but there had never been a real example of time and space travel. According to Wang Lu's understanding, there were currently several popular conjectures. One of them was that history could not be changed. Even if someone could go back to the past by some means, they would find that they could not change anything that had happened, because their time and space travel itself was already doomed by history. Another one was the parallel space theory. People could indeed change history by going back to the past, but from the moment they went back, the history had branched off, and they could only change one of the branches. Relatively speaking, Wang Lu preferred the second hypothesis, because at least the second hypothesis made people have the possibility to exert their subjective initiative. For example, in this case, if Wang Lu's efforts could change the tragic experience of Lingjian School, then he would certainly go all out. As for the other branches that had not been changed, in any case, it had nothing to do with him, so he didn't need to care about it. Moreover, if his time and space travel was already doomed by history, then, there was no reason for him to cultivate in Spirit Sword Mountain for 20 years, but no elder had ever mentioned it to him. Not to mention that he still clearly remembered that in the Immortal Gathering, he almost had no chance to enter the mountain because of the blurred vision of the sect leader. If they really remembered him, how could they make such a mistake? Therefore, from now on he had to correct his mentality. Everything that he did in the Savage Land was to reverse history. If he did it well enough, the golden generation of Lingjian School might not die. Regarding the golden generation, Wang Lu actually had no feelings for them. After all, most of the elders who taught him his skills were unknown in the golden generation at that time. In other words, if the golden generation did not die, would Feng Yin still be the head of the Lingjian School? Would the position of Elder of Heavenly Sword Hall still belong to Fang He, Lu Xian, and the others? Especially Wang Wu. Would she still be the Wang Wu of today? However, Wang Lu did not intend to be indifferent to what had happened in the past just because of these things. In Spirit Sword Mountain, after getting along with the elders for decades, Wang Lu could clearly feel that the pain of that year was a shadow that they could not forget for a lifetime. If they could change the past, they would definitely choose to change it even if they had to sacrifice everything now. Wang Lu had received a lot of kindness from the elders of Spirit Sword Mountain, so at this time, it was time to repay them. Half a day later, the group of 9 people passed through a jadeite forest and advanced along the steep mountain path until a clear spring appeared in the distance. Well, we finally see Blessed Fountain, but we have consumed a lot of energy along the way. Let's camp here and go to Blessed Fountain tomorrow. The big brother of Spirit Sword Sect, Ouyang Shang, thought for a moment and then made a decision. Then there was a burst of cheers from the back of the team. Several young cultivators directly lay down on the ground and didn't want to move even half a step. Ouyang Shang shrugged slightly and shook his head. Obviously, he was slightly dissatisfied with the laziness of his junior brothers and sisters. Then he turned his head and whispered to the young man beside him, who was also wearing a red and white robe and whose appearance was somewhat similar to him, "I've let you see a joke. These junior brothers and sisters are really not up to standard. It's you who is too demanding." Wang Lu lightly responded. Along the way it was not a smooth journey. At this time there was no black tide that Wang Lu later saw in the savage land of the Western Mountain, but the indigenous creatures of the savage land were still an important threat that could not be ignored. In the jadeite forest, the group of people was attacked by monsters. A group of no less than 100 mountain spirits and tree monsters that had cultivated inner cores surrounded them. Their attacks were like a tide, and their leader was a ferocious human-faced owl. Its strength was comparable to that of an ordinary peak-stage gold core cultivator. Although there were 2 Taoist Master King Pill in the team of Spirit Sword Sect, after fighting all the way, everyone's consumption was not small. However, in Wang Lu's view, it was already incredible that this group of people could successfully break through the encirclement without any casualties. The team led by Ouyang Shang was not even the strongest elite of the Golden Generation. The strength of the 8 disciples was uneven, and they were evenly selected from more than 100 disciples to form a team. Their comprehensive strength was similar to that of other teams, and they didn't have the strength to go against the heaven. However, in the jadeite forest, the human-faced owl beast and its minions had the terrifying strength bonus. However, under the leadership of Ouyang Shang, the group of people was more daunting than dangerous. During this period, although Wang Lu had made a lot of contributions, he didn't show his full ability. The success of breaking through the encirclement mainly depended on the strength of this team of cultivators. And this strength was really considerable. Although it was not to the point of going against the heaven, this team of cultivators was the top elite in any sect, and at that time, there were actually more than 10 such teams in Lingjian School. However, Ouyang Shang was still not satisfied. Compared with the cultivators of the same generation, our group of cultivators is indeed very strong, but it's still far from enough to make up for the decline of Lingjian School in the past thousands of years. Compared with the other sects of the 5 uniques, the foundation of Lingjian School is too poor. It's at an absolute disadvantage in any aspect, and there's not much time left for us to catch up. Not much. Do you need to be in such a hurry? There's no other way, there's no hurry. The gap between Lingjian school and the other sects is widened little by dozens of generations of cultivators over thousands of years, and the time that Lingjian school can use to catch up is none other than our golden generation. I don't know how much luck Lingjian school has to be able to gather so many talented and loyal disciples in this generation. When our generation passes away, I'm afraid it's impossible for us to have the same luck again. And to catch up with the gap of thousands of years in one generation, that's easier said than done. Wang Lu asked with a smile, is it necessary to be so obsessed with catching up with the gap? To be able to stabilize the position of one of the 5 uniques is already good enough. The one who takes the top gets the middle, and the one who takes the middle gets the bottom. The reason why Lingjian school has declined from its heyday until now is because it doesn't want to make progress. The biggest reason is that it doesn't want to make progress. Ouyang Shang shook his head and said, right now in the Wanxian League, Xingjing school is the dominant sect, which has an absolute and unshakable lead over the other sections. However, whether it's the Royal Soldier sect or the 10,000 Arts sect, they have never given up on catching up with Xingjing school, and Xingjing school has never lost its sense of crisis. But they are still like this. How could our Lingjian school, which has fallen behind, just let it go? Only by redoubling our efforts and bearing a heavier burden than any other sect could we possibly catch up step by step. The ancients said that everyone is born with talent, so for Lingjian school to suddenly produce a golden generation, presumably, there must be a historical mission that we need to undertake. After saying that, Ouyang Shang smiled. I'm sorry, I started talking to myself again. Alas, since I was a child I have this problem. As long as I open my mouth I can't stop. Sometimes I would accidentally say something that I shouldn't say. However, please believe that I treat people with sincerity, and I would never intentionally make things difficult for others. Alas, unfortunately, there are very few people in this world who understand me. Not to mention outside, even in the mountain, I was often scolded by my master and uncles. The most hateful thing is that there are a few incompetent junior brothers and sisters who suggested me to wear a chew, which is simply outrageous. How could a mere chew stop your mouth? Ouyang Shang gawked for a moment and then nodded. That's reasonable. How can we rely on external force to change our own problem? On this point I never thought about it. Junior brother Wang Lu is indeed a genius cultivator who could achieve the king pill at such a young age. There are many things that I can learn from you. Hearing this, Wang Lu completely realized that this guy's mouth was hopeless, so he was too lazy to continue talking. He directly blocked his hearing and no longer paid attention to Ouyang Shang, who was talking non-stop. Although this was a bit cruel to Ouyang Shang, who was in the mood to talk, but Wang Lu really didn't have the mood to strike up a conversation with him. At the same time, Wang Lu was also deeply moved. Although this senior brother Ouyang's mouth was a bit messy, and his brain was a bit off, but when it came to major issues he was actually very clear-headed and rational. His thinking was actually not wrong at all. With Lingjian school's current situation, if they wanted to truly stabilize the structure of the 5 uniques, or even advance further in the cultivation world, they could only put in more effort than the other sections. The golden generation was a heaven-sent opportunity, and also the only opportunity. If it was replaced by anyone they would not let it go. Moreover, along the way Wang Lu could see that Ouyang Shang was not all brawn and no brains. Although he had an almost pathological obsession with becoming stronger, in the specific process of implementation, Ouyang Shang had actually always controlled the risk within a cautious range. For example, this temporary change of route to Blessed Fountain was made after taking into account that Wang Lu's addition would enhance the team's strength. And the fierce battle in Jadeite Forest had also completely proved that his calculation was accurate. The group of people just happened to reduce the risk of the battle to a level where there was no surprise and no danger. Such a person was indeed worthy of the name of the sect's senior brother. In a sense, he was even more competent than him. Compared to Ouyang Shang, Wang Lu's personal style was too distinct, and he was not approachable enough. Then the next question was, since there was no problem with Ouyang Shang, what was the tragedy that eventually led to the destruction of the golden generation? While he was thinking about it, he suddenly heard Ouyang Shang change the subject. He no longer talked about the impact of the backward construction of the public cafeteria of Spirit Sword Mountain on the cultivation base of the sect's disciples. Instead, he proposed, Junior brother Wang Lu, I think it's not too late, why don't we go fishing? Do you mean the rumor that a certain elder received 250 million gold spirit stones from Royal Soldier sect to overthrow the rule of the sect leader, and then see which junior brother and junior sister are fooled? Whoever is fooled is a stupid fish. Junior brother Wang Lu, how did you come up with such a perverted game? But this time I mean it literally. Just the two of us fishing. With that, Ouyang Shang pointed to the distance. In the distance, under the setting sun, the blessed fountain was glittering with thousands of golden scales. Ouyang Shang actually wanted to team up with Wang Lu and go to Blessed Fountain in advance. I finally understand how the golden generation died. Chapter 482. For Ouyang Shang's proposal to go fishing at Blessed Fountain, Wang Lu didn't hesitate to agree. First, Wang Lu really wanted to know the real purpose of Ouyang Shang. He asked him to form a team to go to Blessed Fountain ahead of time. Was it really for fishing? Second, Wang Lu didn't put a mere Blessed Fountain in his eyes. Although Blessed Fountain was still a dangerous place full of thorns for the golden generation of Spirit Sword sect, for a person who had created one miracle after another in his more than 20 years of debut, the 1,000-year-old flood dragon residing in Blessed Fountain was actually not enough. Even if Wang Lu couldn't win, he still had enough strength to safely retreat. And Ouyang Shang was also a straightforward person. When Wang Lu agreed, he explained it to Kai Xia. We'll go out for a walk first. You guys stay here and don't run around. If you encounter something, remember to inform me in time. Then he pulled Wang Lu and disappeared without a trace, leaving the stunned Kai Xia standing in the same place. She didn't even have the time to step on Ouyang Shang's foot. The two of them flew together from the cliff of the mountain all the way to the bank of Blessed Fountain. Although the journey was not far, along the way the two of them could perceive that there were a lot of hidden dangers nearby. It's indeed worthy to be called the Savage Land. It can always give people stimulation and uplift their spirits. After waving his sword to drive away an overly curious strange bird, Ouyang Shang had already stepped on the cobblestone on the side of Blessed Fountain. And Wang Lu was right behind him. After landing, he went straight to the point. If there's anything you want to say, can you say it now? It's really possible? Ouyang Shang showed a pleasantly surprised expression. Obviously, in his decades of life, there were very few people who said to him, just say what you want to say, such generous words. Only the useful parts. That's a lot. Ouyang Shang's interest was not diminished. Obviously for him, the concept of useful was too broad. Perhaps discussing whether to eat savory tofu pudding or sweet tofu pudding tonight was enough to be an important topic. Very well, let me be clear. It's limited to the top 2 specific matters related to our fishing operation. Each matter must not exceed 1,000 words. Ouyang Shang was shocked. At that moment, his gaze on Wang Lu became sharp, as if he was looking at his natural enemy. This fellow actually used a single sentence to seal off his joy of speaking freely. The bloodline of the sect leader truly lived up to its name. However, since that was the case, then he would just have to do official business. This time, we are indeed here to fish. There is a 1,000-year-old flood dragon in the Blessed Fountain. It is the biggest obstacle to our base here, and I plan to use the next month to gather everyone's strength to expel or subdue it. I believe you can also calculate that for the current us, this goal is very difficult. Wang Lu said, according to the popular formula of Royal Soldier sect, the possibility of us reaching the goal without any loss is less than 1%. There is an 80% chance that both sides will suffer. Among the 9 of us, at least 2 or 3 people will fall. You have the internal combat deduction formula of Royal Soldier sect? If it's convenient, I'd like to learn from you, but back to the topic at hand. It was rare for Ouyang Shang to take the initiative to return to the topic at hand. It could be seen that he was bound to waste a lot of words on the next topic. The difficulty of the goal is relative to the present. But in the next month, I will make the strength of the team go up a big step so that we have a 70% chance of defeating the opponent. At that time, I will really start the decisive battle. If we want to complete this evolution in 1 month, there is only one way to go: actual combat. The target of the actual combat is the 1,000-year-old flood dragon in the Blessed Fountain, as well as its shrimp soldiers and crab generals. I believe that with the talent of the junior brothers and sisters, every time they fight, they will have a great harvest. Coupled with their decades of cultivation base in the mountain, their progress will be very rapid. But from another point of view, the first battle will be very dangerous, especially for the junior brothers and sisters with the lowest cultivation base, as well as those with higher cultivation base than them, but especially like to sacrifice themselves to save others. Caught off guard, it is likely that there will be heavy casualties. Before he could finish, Wang Lu interrupted him. So you asked me to scout ahead of time? Yes, at least we have to find out the actual situation of the flood dragon. The current intelligence is completely based on the notes left by the elder who came to the savage land to pick herbs by chance, so the error may be quite astonishing. The information about the 1,000-year-old flood dragon was updated 30 years ago, so it is not unusual for there to be any changes in the past 30 years. I don't want to bring the junior brothers and sisters tomorrow to explore the savage land, only to find that the situation is completely out of control and dangerous. Wang Lu asked with interest, "You are worried that the junior brothers and sisters will be in danger, but aren't you afraid that something will happen to you if you go fishing first?" "Of course not, I am the big brother of the Lingjian school, how can I fall here?" Ouyang Shang was very generous, "And if even I am afraid, what about the junior brothers and sisters? How can the management trainee program of the Lingjian school be carried out? So I must not be afraid and I will not be afraid. My courage will support me to keep moving forward." Hearing this, Wang Lu could not help but sigh in his heart. It was really a pity that this guy died that year. If he could survive. If Heavenly Sword Hall could have such an elder. Unfortunately, all of these were just if. Because Wang Lu already knew the end of Ouyang Shang, he felt that it was a pity that Ouyang Shang was in high spirits at this time. Unfortunately, he still didn't know why Ouyang Shang died, and he didn't know where the catastrophe that even the elders of Spirit Sword sect could not escape came from. Otherwise, he would go to the Spirit Sword Mountain to report to the elders, even if it meant exposing his identity as a time traveler. He must stop all of this from happening. But now, even if he went to the Spirit Sword Mountain, there was nothing he could do. He had no way to prove that he was a time traveler. The phenomenon of Lingjian school being separated from the previous generation was too serious, and he knew very little about the previous generation of elders, so there was no way he could prove that he was a time traveler. And even if he could prove that he was inextricably linked with the Lingjian school, it was still a fantasy to want the Lingjian school to cancel the management trainee program. After all, at this time he was just a time traveler, and the big brother and lead disciple who could influence the decision of the sect was Ouyang Shang. Because of this, Wang Lu followed Ouyang Shang closely, ready to act according to the situation. Although in theory, his strength as Taoist Master King Pill might not be enough to go against the heaven, after so many years of cultivation, he had done too many things that couldn't be calculated by theory. Very well, then let me see what kind of ability this Blessed Fountain's Flood Dragon has. With that, Wang Lu took the lead and stepped into the Blessed Fountain one step ahead of Ouyang Shang. The moment his feet fell into the water, the creature in the depths of the fountain was suddenly awakened. With a roar that shook the water surface, a water column soared into the sky. Wang Lu propped up his non-phase sword defense and firmly stood firm under the impact of the water column, stepping on the burst of water under his feet. His posture was indescribably cool and calm. However, the complexion of Ouyang Shang, who was next to the water, suddenly changed. "Junior brother Wang Lu, be careful." Because after the water column reached the highest point, it turned into rain all over the sky. The rain pattered on the vegetation on the shore, but it brought forth a pungent smoke. The plants that were splashed by the water droplets withered and turned yellow, and the beasts in the forest fell to the ground. Their fur curled up, blood dripped, and they died in pain. The water of the blessed fountain had unexpectedly turned into a highly toxic substance in an instant. The toxicity was far more violent than imagined. In the depths of the savage land near Blessed Fountain, the creatures that had lived here for a long time were no longer simple characters. However, under the corrosion of the poisonous water, they had no resistance. The residual power of the water column was already like this. Being in the center of the impact of the water column, the pressure that Wang Lu had to bear could be imagined. However, Wang Lu didn't care about this at all. After propping up his defense with his non-phase sword defense, he still had the strength to stab his primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi underwater. The sword chi was extremely soft and gentle. It quietly eroded down the water column, extending all the way until it touched a domain that should not be violated. The next moment, a huge sense of crisis surged in the hearts of Wang Lu and Ouyang Shang at the same time. "Let's go." On the water column, Wang Lu warned while controlling the sword of Mount Kuan to fly up, no longer provoking the flood dragon in the blessed fountain. Ouyang Shang was even more vigilant. Without waiting for Wang Lu to open his mouth, he had already escaped with the ground shrinking technique. The next moment, the sky above Blessed Fountain was covered with dark clouds. Only a flash of lightning could be heard, followed by a torrential downpour. The rain was like a curtain, as if the Milky Way was pouring down to the ground. The water level of the pool that was not full began to rise rapidly. The water swallowed everything on the shore and expanded into a wide lake. And in the depths of the lake, countless pairs of fierce eyes suddenly opened. Haha, the feeling of teasing a Yuanying stage-old monster is quite cool. At this time, 10 miles away, Wang Lu and Ouyang Shang had already entered the safe zone. Wang Lu descended from the sky with a satisfied smile. Ouyang Shang also had a smile on his face, but there was a hint of seriousness in his smile. This flood dragon of blessed fountain is stronger than expected. 30 years ago, when the sect's elders passed by, it could only rely on the momentum of the mountains and rivers. But now it can link up with the power of heaven. Moreover, the pool is not filled with shrimp soldiers and crab generals, but rather the descendants of the flood dragon. The number is small, but the comprehensive strength is much stronger. Ouyang Shang's eyesight was very sharp. When the water level of Blessed Fountain rose, he only took a glance and basically understood the outline of the flood dragon's strength. However, after seeing it clearly, he was instead shocked. It seems that the plan to choose the location of Blessed Fountain needs to be adjusted. Ouyang Shang nodded and then suddenly changed the topic. Speaking of which, junior brother Wang Lu, there is something that I have always wanted to ask, but now I have to say it. Who exactly are you? Ouyang Shang looked at Wang Lu. His eyes were burning but not sharp and threatening. Instead, they were full of sincerity, like a young girl yearning for love. Wang Lu smiled. Didn't you say that I am the illegitimate child of the sect leader? That's impossible. Ouyang Shang resolutely said, a mere illegitimate child of the sect leader, it is impossible to easily block the poisonous water array of the blessed fountain. That water contains the essence of the 1,000-year-old flood dragon, which is very corrosive. Even if I resist it, it would be a bit difficult. But not only did you block it, you also seem to be doing it with ease. Wang Lu shrugged his shoulders. About this, although I am embarrassed to say it, but your strength seems to be above me. Ouyang Shang said, but because of this, I am sure that you are not the illegitimate child of the sect leader. What is the relationship between these two things? Ouyang Shang said, because I am the illegitimate child of the sect leader. F***CK. Chapter 483. Wang Lu found that since the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman failed to transfer time and space, which involved him in this time travel drama, his worldview had been repeatedly hit. It could make Wang Lu himself, the worldview destroyer, feel shaken, which showed how terrifying the script of this drama was. However, as one of the leading actors, Ouyang Shang seemed very calm. I am the illegitimate child of the sect leader, so I am very clear about how much resources the sect can invest and how much effect I can achieve as an illegitimate child. I also know the potential limit of this bloodline. To put it bluntly, my strength basically means a limit, but you have surpassed this limit. Although the range is not too big, it is undoubtedly beyond doubt. Ouyang Shang said, of course there are no absolutes in this world. Perhaps you had some fortuitous encounters on the path of cultivation. Perhaps you have some fortuitous encounter on the road of immortal cultivation, but since your talent and strength are above me, then there is no reason for the sect leader not to choose you as the big brother of the sect, which is also the future leader of the sect. Wang Lu said with a smile, perhaps he just doesn't like me. If you know him, you should know that he has never been a person who pays attention to personal feelings. He has long given everything to the sect, even his former lover can be abandoned like a pair of worn-out shoes. He chose me not because I am his son but because I am better than anyone else. Wang Lu smiled bitterly. He was indeed not familiar with the sect leader of this generation. Because the sect leader he was familiar with was called Feng Yin, who in this era should still be a young man with Shudan stage cultivation base. In short, at first, I really thought that you are the illegitimate child of the sect leader, because only that explanation seemed to be the most reasonable. But now it seems that I have guessed wrong, so I want to know who exactly are you? Wang Lu thought about it and felt that with Ouyang Shang's temperament, the most appropriate answer should be, if I say that I am a time traveler, what would you think? Upon hearing this, Ouyang Shang was startled. After thinking for a moment, he smiled and said, welcome to 9 regions. Then his smile faded. May I ask, what are you doing here? His reaction was not bad. He was indeed the big brother of Spirit Sword sect. The thickness of his nerves had reached the standard. I'm here to save you, Wang Lu said frankly. Or rather, I'm here to save all of you. Ouyang Shang's eyes widened. Are you here to save all of us? This kind of speech reminds me of some cult teachings that are popular in some remote and backward places. You have a good eye. Before I transmigrated, I did hold the position of a cult leader. Even with Ouyang Shang's eloquence at this moment, he also felt somewhat speechless. Fortunately, Wang Lu didn't wait for him to continue. Even so, I wasn't joking when I said I'm here to save people. Wang Lu thought that since his identity as a transmigrator had been revealed, there was no need to hide the rest of the matter, so he summarized it concisely. I come from 150 years in the future, and I was the lead disciple of Spirit Sword sect at that time. And according to the history I know, your group was almost wiped out in the Savage Land. Really? Ouyang Shang's tone was relatively flat. He didn't directly rebuke him, nor did he fall into fear. Wiped out? So, the reason you transmigrated this time is to save us? Although the cause and effect relationship is somewhat reversed at present, it's more or less the same. If that's the case, then I thank you on behalf of my junior brothers and sisters. Ouyang Shang nodded his head. But you don't have to say the next words. Wang Lu froze for a moment. I wanted to be polite, but since you said no, then forgive me for going straight to the point. Actually, I've wanted to say this for a long time. Your management training program is simply seeking death. I think it's better to withdraw it as soon as possible. Ouyang Shang also froze for a moment. When I said you don't have to say the next words, I was referring to this. Wang Lu froze again. This, Uncle Ouyang? You don't have to call me uncle. You've transmigrated here so we can talk as equals. Okay, senior brother Ouyang, as far as I know, the cause of your death is precisely this management training program. Specifically? Ouyang Shang asked with great interest. Specifically, how did we die? Wang Lu shrugged his shoulders. I don't know, the survivors have never mentioned it to me. Then how are you so sure that the culprit is the management training program? Deduced from the clues, among many possibilities, this is the most likely. Wang Lu confidently took his reasoning as the truth. I see. Ouyang Shang did not refute. Then have you ever considered, even if I can accept your explanation, can Lingjian school? Probably not, that's why I specifically accompanied you for a day. Wang Lu was also very calm. It doesn't matter if others don't believe it as long as you believe it. Hearing this, Ouyang Shang smiled. As expected of the future chief disciple of Lingjian school. Talent, strength, and scheming are all at such a level. Why should Lingjian school worry about not being able to revive? Seeing you, I feel that even if all of us die, it doesn't matter. I think it does matter a bit. Ouyang Shang laughed even louder. I just meant it. In this era, I am like a star in the sky, and one day I will become a blazing sun. How could I die so easily? That would be the loss of the entire 9 regions. Your shameless face actually has a bit of my charm. Wang Lu smiled. Speaking of which, although I don't know the details of what happened that year, but, Ouyang Shang waved his hand again. Forget it, I'm not interested in the experience of the loser. Since you were born in the history of my failure, there's no need to tell me what I'm like as a loser. It's uncomfortable to hear it. After a pause, Ouyang Shang said, in any case, since this management training program can get such a strong aide like you, I think even if there was such a fatal crisis before, when the time comes, we can turn misfortune into fortune. At least for now, we can work in that direction. Wang Lu nodded. This is also one of the purposes of me following you all the way. After all, he didn't know the whole picture of what happened more than 100 years ago, so Wang Lu couldn't determine which link went wrong that led to such a tragedy in Spirit Sword Mountain. And in the case where everything was still unknown, rash action was likely to have the opposite effect. For example, the worst-case scenario was that the cause of the destruction of the Golden Generation was an opponent that they simply couldn't match. In those days, the Lingjian school survived by cutting off one's wrist. If they listened to Wang Lu's suggestion at this time and everyone holed up in seclusion, the result would be that they didn't even have the chance to cut off one's wrist. In the real sense, they would be completely wiped out. The possibility of this guess was not great, but who dared to bet? Therefore, compared to rash action, Wang Lu would rather go steady and personally follow the Golden Generation to reclaim the Savage Land. By then, no matter what situation they encountered, there would always be room for mediation. He was not too worried that he would be buried along with them. After all, there were survivors in the Golden Generation. Since Feng Yin and Wang Wu could survive, of course he could too. Let's push this trainee plan to completion together. For Wang Lu, compared to simply using his time travel advantage to save people, wouldn't it be better if he could complete the management training of that year? With the promise of Wang Lu, Ouyang Shang seemed very happy. Wang Lu, on the other hand, was very calm. Then, next, Ouyang Shang said, next, according to what I said, we should first adjust the strategic policy of the location of Blessed Fountain. The strength of the Flood Dragon is beyond expectation, so half a day later, Wang Lu saw the result of Ouyang Shang's adjustment. This big brother of Spirit Sword sect did have an unexpected specialty. Wang Lu thought that after seeing the power of the Flood Dragon, he would choose to return to Jadeite Forest, but the result was, big brother, I can't believe we meet again after only 3 days. Could it be that you've encountered a problem that you need the help of us junior brothers and sisters? In midair, a hearty laughter came. In his field of vision, a group of cultivators wearing spirit sword sect's robes flew over. The leader was a big man with a curly beard. He was strong and had a loud and clear voice, with messy short hair, a loose gray robe and 2 wine gourds on his waist. His unruly temperament assaulted one's face. However, if one looked carefully at his facial features, one could find that he was actually not that old. Especially his quick-witted eyes, which showed a bit of immaturity. However, to be able to become the leader of the elite team, this curly-beard man obviously had his own uniqueness. Even Ouyang Shang looked at him differently. Junior brother Yang, this time I'm not asking you for help, but to give you an opportunity. While the two of them were talking, the group led by the curly-beard man Yang Fei had already landed at the top of the mountain. What opportunity? Yang Fei was impatient. After landing, he couldn't wait to ask, did you catch a beautiful seductress? There's a big guy. Ouyang Shang pointed his finger at the location of Blessed Fountain. I plan to let everyone share it. In addition to you, I also called junior brother Zhou Ming and junior brother Han Churen. Oh, that's 4 groups of people. What kind of big guy is worth so many people? 4 groups of people are scattered in different places, so the time spent on the round-trip trip is already a lot. Yang Fei's words actually showed the quality of his coarse words. Ouyang Shang lightly smiled. You'll know when you see it. Seeing that his senior brother intended to keep it a secret, Yang Fei didn't care about it. In any case, he had been with his big brother for so many years, when did he ever let him down? It was just that. Then Yang Fei couldn't help but raise his eyebrows as a new question came to him. Who is that guy? He looks unfamiliar. He pointed his finger at Wang Lu, who was chatting with the young cultivators of Spirit Sword sect that he brought with him. The corner of Ouyang Shang's mouth curled up. He's the byproduct of that old thing sect leader enjoying life. Oh? Yang Fei was somewhat in disbelief, but soon convinced himself, no wonder he looks a bit like Yuk. Chapter 484. The rumor that Wang Lu was the illegitimate child of the sect leader was soon widely spread and recognized. Among them, the big brother Ouyang Shang's deliberate promotion was the most important. He enjoyed a high prestige within the sect, and his words could be said to be final on important matters. Secondly, although the illegitimate child conjecture was absurd upon careful thought, it seemed to perfectly explain the sudden appearance of Wang Lu, so it quickly took root in people's hearts. As for Wang Lu himself, he was also happy to see it. Otherwise, why would he expose his identity as a time traveler to everyone? Among these people he only trusted Ouyang Shang. However, compared to the topic of illegitimate child, what was really worth paying attention to was Ouyang Shang's boldness and radicalism. In order to deal with the flood dragon of Blessed Fountain, he actually directly summoned 4 teams of people and prepared for a long and team fight. According to his theory, since the flood dragon was far from what their team could contend against, then they should just find a few more teams. If it was still not enough, then they could find more teams. With more than 100 people to manage and train, they would definitely be able to kill the flood dragon. In short, words like retreat and giving up never appeared in his consideration. In this regard, Wang Lu was non-committal. Although Ouyang Shang's strategy was radical, it was not necessarily more dangerous than when he challenged the Holy One with his peak Shudan stage strength in the Western continent. Not to mention that thanks to him summoning 4 teams of people, Wang Lu finally saw a few familiar faces. Haha, junior brother Zhou Ming, you're the latest, so you should drink 3 cups of wine as punishment. I think the immortal jade drink that you've been collecting for many years is not bad. Punish your sister. You made me come all the way from the swamp in one breath, yet you still want to covet my wine? Zhou Ming unceremoniously swatted away Ouyang Shang's hand that was reaching for his mustard seed bag with his scabbard. Seeing this future 4th elder of Spirit Sword sect, Wang Lu couldn't help but smile. Previously, when he inquired about the news in the Spirit Sword sect, the 10 elders of Heavenly Sword Hall were almost all losers in the Golden Age, and only a few of them were ranked high. Now it seemed like Uncle Zhou Ming was one of them. However, among the hundreds of people of the Golden Generation, he had already seen 1/3 of them, so how could there only be 2 familiar faces? One was Lu Li and one was Zhou Ming. What about the others? Where was sect leader Feng Yin? This was especially so for the person he missed the most. It was truly regretful that he couldn't see her. However, Wang Lu's attention quickly shifted elsewhere. Among the 4 teams gathered at the top of the mountain, the ratio of men and women was basically balanced. There were slightly more girls, and the average quality of the nearly 20 girls made Wang Lu quite impressed. He didn't expect Lingjian School to produce beauties in the past, and the quality of the beauties was not inferior to professional organizations like Yin Yang sect. One had to know that the pursuit of beauty by cultivators and mortals was on a completely different level. Because even foundation establishment cultivators, and even some qi condensation cultivators could use unique techniques to change the shape of their fleshly bodies. At that time, a beautiful face and a sexy figure would be at his fingertips. In such a big environment, the cultivators naturally had a higher demand. Details. For example, skin. It sounded simple to say that it was as smooth as jade, but was it really smooth and flawless, or was it just that the body hair was relatively thin? It was also clean, but there were differences in the glossiness of the skin, and there were also great differences in the fine lines. These differences might be insignificant to the mortal world or even undetectable, but at the level of cultivators, they were more and more important, because their pursuit of beauty had already reached the microscopic level. And the requirement of microscopic level posed a challenge to the cultivators' beauty maintenance. Especially the higher the level of the cultivators, the more stringent and difficult to satisfy the requirements of the details. For example, in terms of figure, generally speaking, if a woman had a 34D cup, it was enough to be proud, but in the eyes of some cultivators, this number was simply too rough to look straight at. There was number 34. With a chest circumference of 1415926, how could she have the nerve to come out and meet people? And to maintain the chest circumference to such precision and stability for a long time, ordinary cultivators really couldn't do it. If you want to be beautiful, you have to work hard. This was almost universal for both men and women. The natural beauty of the mortal world was basically not enough at the microscopic level. Attention must be paid to adjusting the fleshly body, and the knowledge was hard to explain in a few words. Moreover, in addition to external beauty, cultivators also emphasized temperament. If the temperament was not good, like a certain person, no matter how perfect her appearance was, points would still be deducted. And in Wang Lu's view, this generation of female disciples of Lingjian School could be called the best beauties in the same realm. Perhaps there was still a gap between them and the super beauties like Xiao Liuli, but it was enough to make the girls of the Yin Yang sect pale in comparison. And thinking that this group of girls would eventually be annihilated, Wang Lu felt even more bitter. Those who died were all girls, and they were all delicate and lovely girls. If only the ones who died were those who had no integrity like Wang Wu, how good would it be? With this thought in mind, Wang Lu chatted and laughed with the girls to his heart's content. Because of the eldest senior brother's guarantee, the girls didn't guard against him and quickly got along with him. At the same time, he also noticed that there was a figure in the crowd that seemed to be quite unique. It was a girl with an ordinary appearance and temperament. From a mortal's point of view, this girl could be called beautiful. Her delicate small face and thin but curvaceous body were enough to make many men who had been single for decades go crazy. However, at this time, under the contrast of so many beautiful girls of Spirit Sword sect, this girl suddenly seemed dull. It could be seen that she didn't care about her appearance at all. She was completely unwilling to spend a little bit of effort to decorate herself, so many details seemed very rough. At the same time, her temperament was stiff, which formed a sharp contrast with the lively and lovely girls around her. Moreover, she was indeed out of tune with her surroundings. Right now, the 4 teams of cultivators had gathered together under the summons of Ouyang Shang. Everyone was talking and laughing, sharing what they had seen and heard in the past few days. Only she stood alone in the corner, not saying a word. Because she was unique, she attracted the interest of Wang Lu. "Hey, hello." With a hint of a gentle smile, Wang Lu ran to greet the ordinary-looking girl. However, the other party didn't have the slightest reaction. Even her half-opened eyes didn't move. It wasn't until Wang Lu called her again that she suddenly woke up and opened her eyes wide. What do you want?" The girl's voice seemed to be somewhat lacking in energy, intermittent. However, Wang Lu was keenly aware that this was because she had diverted most of her energy to other places. Her energy for conversation was seriously insufficient. While she was speaking, she would be absent-minded. And the thing that she was distracted with was cultivation. When he got close to the girl, he could clearly feel that the surrounding spiritual energy was slowly but firmly rotating around her. The girl tried to use her primordial spirit to construct an energy cycle. This was a very orthodox cultivation method. It was so orthodox that it seemed strange in this place where geniuses gathered. Because it was too orthodox, the efficiency was not high. Unless it was accumulated over a long period of time, without a moment's rest, only then could there be some achievements. However, the test of perseverance and endurance of the cultivator was too harsh. Generally, only those who were forced to do closed-door training would cultivate in this way. Is this performance art? Wang Lu stepped forward and asked. The girl glanced at him, then closed her eyes and continued to focus on constructing her own energy cycle, no longer paying attention to this inexplicable question. Wang Lu smiled and did not disturb her. Instead, he turned his head and walked over to ask Ouyang Shang. That girl over there, what's going on? Ouyang Shang glanced at her and sighed. She has always been one of the most hardworking people in the sect. Unfortunately, her talent is limited, and she has never been able to achieve high enough achievements. If her talent is so poor, it's better to expel her from the golden generation. Why bring her here and take risks? Poor talent? Ouyang Shang sighed again. The so-called talent, in essence, is nothing more than the progress of cultivation divided by the time of cultivation, and her results are not worse than others. Cultivating for 20 years to reach the Shudan stage in other sects, she can be called a genius, right? Wang Lu of course agreed with this theory. With his experience and knowledge, he naturally would not be as narrow-minded as some people who only judged heroes based on their spirit root aptitude. If he really counted it that way, then his void spirit root was actually a standard waste spirit root when he entered the sect. There were many factors that determine the achievements of a cultivator, such as the nature of the spirit root, talent, wisdom, perseverance, and luck. If a cultivator with poor aptitude could obtain an immortal inheritance every time he jumped off a cliff, and after 10 jumps he could ascend to the immortal world, would you say that he was not a genius? Therefore, it was meaningless to care about a single factor. The most objective way was, as Ouyang Shang said, to divide the progress of cultivation by the time of cultivation, and since that ordinary girl's results were not bad, in fact, I have always been very optimistic about her. Ouyang Shang said, although most people in the sect do not agree with my point of view, I have always believed that as long as the nature of the spirit root is above a certain foundation, then what determines a cultivator's achievements is often his character. And with Wang Wu's character, she can undoubtedly achieve great things. Yes. Wait, what did you say her name was? Ouyang Shang was somewhat surprised by Wang Lu's fuss. Wang Wu, this name is nothing special, right? Or does she have some connection with you, a time traveler, in the future? *CK, the connection is too big. But at this time Wang Lu already had no time to explain anything to Ouyang Shang. When he learned that this beautiful but coarse girl was his future Shizhuan, Wang Lu really had a feeling that his three views were once again collapsing. In terms of appearance, there were indeed some similarities between the two, but because the difference in temperament and demeanor was too big, it was impossible to think that they were the same. In fact, no matter how you looked at it, it was difficult to see that this indifferent and introverted girl would be the future Wang Wu who had lost all her moral integrity. Wang Lu was stunned for a moment and then thought again. As the saying goes, you can't judge a book by its cover. Perhaps at this time, Wang Wu was only using diligent cultivation to cover up her unruly heart. Let me carefully investigate. So he shook off Ouyang Shang and once again came in front of Wang Wu. In the future, the tall and slender Shizhuan, who was almost not inferior to his Shizhuan, was now just a slightly childish young girl, shorter than Wang Lu by more than half a head. When Wang Lu walked forward, his whole body was covered in shadows. Then Wang Lu lowered his head and seriously asked, "Do you want to date?" Chapter 485. Perhaps it was because Wang Lu was too close that the energy circulation had been disturbed. Wang Wu opened her eyes and looked at Wang Lu with some bewilderment. Wang Lu repeated, "Do you want to make an appointment?" Wang Wu slightly frowned, seemingly not understanding what he was talking about. Wang Lu secretly sneered, "Pretend, I'll let you pretend." Then he briefly explained, "Do you want to have a one-night stand?" "One-night stand?" The girl raised her head, her eyes looked very blank. A moment later, a blush gradually appeared on her cheeks, and her head that had just been raised immediately drooped down. Wang Lu simply wanted to applaud this exquisite performance. "Damn it, I can't believe you were so good at acting when you were young. What an innocent girl's face, it actually has a blushing function. Tieske, just hearing a one-night stand and you blush, is this something you can do? Your original body is that lust maniac who didn't hesitate to drag his apprentice to bed in order to divide the property." However, before Wang Lu could speak, his shoulder was suddenly patted. Ouyang Shang stood behind Wang Lu and said with a smile, "I'm sorry to disturb you, but it just so happens that they are discussing something important and need your opinion." Wang Lu turned his head and looked at Wang Wu, thinking, in any case there is still a long way to go. Even if there is a gap of 150 years, This ill-fated relationship between the two of us can't be cleared up, so there is no need to fight for this moment. I am indebted to you for more than 20 years on non-phase peak. Now I will definitely repay you 100-fold. Now that Ouyang Shang said that there was something important, he would deal with it first. The so-called important matter was still the flood dragon of Blessed Fountain. After the four teams gathered, Ouyang Shang finally began to unite everyone to formulate the next battle plan, and the core of the plan was undoubtedly the 1,000-year-old flood dragon with the strength of Yuanying's stage. Ouyang Shang's initial plan could be said to be unique. When he pulled Wang Lu over to discuss it, even Wang Lu was slightly surprised. According to the general strategy, when a party was gathered to clear a dungeon with a powerful enemy, it was best to divide the party members into several small groups, each with their own role. For example, those who were good at attacking and had a powerful sword would be the damage output team, those who were good at shielding and defense would be the defense team, and then there would be the support team, the medical team, and so on. When fighting, the shield team would be in front and the damage output team would be in the back. That was generally how it was. Even if there were a few who made more detailed tactical arrangements, it was just that they came up with more positioning strategies and more flexible and effective use of space. This method of everyone performing their own duties had proven its value many times in history. Some people described it as streamlining the battles of cultivators, and it wasn't bad. However, Ouyang Shang had completely broken this convention and boldly adopted the strategy of individual independence. He didn't divide the four teams into groups. Instead, after integrating the four teams, he completely disorganized them, and then arranged independent combat tasks for each person. The cultivation base of the four teams of cultivators was basically between the peak of the Foundation Establishment stage and the low-grade King Pill stage. If they were to confront the 1,000-year-old flood dragon head-on, it would be difficult for them to survive. However, Ouyang Shang didn't need them to face a complete flood dragon. He divided the 1,000-year-old flood dragon into hundreds of parts from different angles, such as an entity, an incorporeal body, and so on. Then he assigned a corresponding task to each person. This method of decomposition was quite new to Wang Lu, a cultivator of the later generation. Ouyang Shang's intention was easy to understand: to fully train his junior brothers and sisters, so that each of them could take charge of an area on their own, rather than becoming parts of a large team. The management trainee program was to train hundreds of elites who could take charge of an area on their own, rather than chess pieces who couldn't survive without the team. However, when Wang Lu carefully considered Ouyang Shang's plan, he felt that it was quite difficult. There was naturally a reason why a streamlined battle could be so popular. Ouyang Shang's decomposition method was whimsical, and the problems he needed to face were quite many. For example, the simplest question: if the flood dragon wants to focus on one point, what should it do? So when I decompose the flood dragon, I will fully consider this point. You see, if the flood dragon attacks with its body, then these points will inevitably move first. Ouyang Shang said, gesturing in the air. His fingertips left a thin trace of light, outlining the ferocious face of the flood dragon, and pointed out several joints of its body. Wang Lu glanced at it. Well, these points have been repeatedly assigned by you. According to your plan, if the flood dragon makes a move, there will be 7 to 8 people who will obstruct it at the first moment, making it difficult for it to exert its strength. At the same time, if it uses a spell to attack, then I can also do the same. Ouyang Shang then pointed out more than a dozen points, but they were all incorporeal bodies, which meant that the target was not the flood dragon's body, but the nodes where the spiritual energy and magical power of heaven and earth changed. Wang Lu nodded again. As long as we can grasp the correct position and counter it with a spell, we can also defend against it. Ouyang Shang said, as for the rest of the situation, including the flood dragon summoning its descendants to help in the battle, I have a plan to deal with them, so I won't list them one by one, but, Wang Lu said, but the whole plan is just an armchair strategist. We haven't personally encountered the flood dragon. Last time, we just had a taste of it and didn't force the other side to play their cards. Even the shape of the flood dragon is drawn according to the notes of the sect's ancestor from 30 years ago. As for the speculation about the attack mode of the flood dragon, it's all based on imagination. Even if it's based on imagination, there are many contradictions in your tactical response. Ouyang Shang said with a smile, my ability is limited. These more than 30 people, each of them has to divide dozens of nodes. Under the arrangement and combination, the amount of calculation is simply appalling. Even if I have a certain level of attainment in mathematics, I still can't cope with it. That's because your algorithm is wrong. Royal Soldier Sect has designed a lot of optimization algorithms for this situation. 10,000 Arts sect has also explored the algorithm problem, and there are more optimized solutions. With that, Wang Lu has listed out the relevant algorithms which made Ouyang Shang fascinated. In fact, when it came to the talent in mathematics, Wang Lu, who was not very keen on mathematics, was certainly not as good as Ouyang Shang. However, the environment and vision of the two were different, which made Wang Lu's mathematical attainment completely ahead of the big brother of Spirit Sword sect 150 years ago. After all, although Ouyang Shang was strong under the guidance of Lingjian school, he didn't have many contacts with the disciples of other sections. Therefore, it was even more impossible for him to get the most advanced algorithm from the lead disciples of other sections. With these algorithms provided by junior brother Wang Lu, my plan is really feasible. Ouyang Shang nodded with great satisfaction. Whether it's the actual situation of the flood dragon and the expected error, or any other situation, the solution can be found in the first place with these algorithms. Then, coupled with several actual combat exercises, I believe that in at most half a year, the flood dragon of Blessed Fountain will be executed. Wang Lu looked up and calculated for a moment. Half a year, almost, as long as the golden generation really lives up to its reputation. The first actual combat began after half a day. The crisis awareness of this generation of disciples of Lingjian school was very strong. No matter what they did, they seemed to race against time. Although not as exaggerated as Wang Wu, their diligent awareness was much stronger than that of the later generation of Spirit Sword sect disciples. After the assembly of the day, they took a short rest for the night. The next morning, the battle officially began. It was still Wang Lu and Ouyang Shang who took the lead, followed by the rest of the people. These 30 or so people did not have a fixed formation and position. Everything was improvised, but they looked calm and confident. The battle plan jointly designed by Ouyang Shang and Wang Lu had been distributed to everyone on the first night. Therefore, most of the people didn't sleep that night, but were trying their best to familiarize themselves with the thick stack of plans. After reading the plan, most people were full of confidence in the first day of the battle. The actual situation was indeed as expected. The 1,000 Years Flood Dragon did not personally go to battle. In the face of more than 30 cultivators gathered in the sky above Blessed Fountain, it very cautiously chose to send out cannon fodder to explore the details. Thus, from the depths of Blessed Fountain, hundreds of flying fishes with wings on their backs sprang out, revealing their sharp blade-like teeth. The two fleshy wings were covered by curved bones, and the outer edge of the bones was even sharper than their teeth, looking like two guillotines. The speed of the flying fishes was extremely fast. Almost at the same time, when there was a faint movement below the water surface, they broke through the water surface and flew into the crowd. Then they used their guillotines and sharp teeth to cut and crush them. All of this was unexpected. If it was an ordinary cultivator, perhaps this cannonball-like charge would have broken their spirit. However, for the Golden Generation, this was not even qualified as an appetizer. In the battle plan, there was no mention of the existence of the flying fishes. From the beginning to the end, the focus of the plan was only on the flood dragon itself, but there was no need for the guidance of the plan. Each of the 37 cultivators in the air immediately found their own position and used their own means to deal with the crisis. In the team, there were several peak foundation establishment cultivators with the lowest cultivation base, which was somewhat difficult to cope with in a hurry. However, without exception, there were peak Shudan stage senior brothers and sisters around them to escort them. All of this was neither planned nor rehearsed. It was purely the tacit understanding of the cultivators of Spirit Sword sect. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of flying fishes were stirred into a sky full of flesh and blood by various magical abilities. The rainstorm fell into the fountain, and the dark red color was like a blasphemy, which soon completely angered the ancestor of the blessed fountain. The sky began to be overcast, and the clear sky was covered by the dark clouds in just a few breaths. The rumbling sound of rolling thunder made people's heart beat faster. Dragon, the legendary ancient immortal beast, was born to move the clouds and make the rain. And the so-called 1,000 Years Flood Dragon was the intermediate form of the flood dragon into a dragon. To put it more broadly, it could be called a half-step true dragon. Of course, for thousands of years in 9 regions, there were many half-step true dragons, but the number of true dragons could be counted on one's fingers. However, even if it was only a half-step true dragon, the pressure before it made its move was still enough to shake people's heart and spirit. According to the legend, the pressure of a true dragon could instantly kill any powerhouse under the level of King Pill. This 1,000 Years Flood Dragon was far inferior to a true dragon, but when it was angry, the pressure when it gathered into a storm was still suffocating. Ready? With the cold voice of Ouyang Shang, the 37 cultivators simultaneously brandished their flying swords, and for a time the swords were densely packed. The next moment, feeling the awe-inspiring killing intent of the disciples of Spirit Sword sect, the flood dragon became even angrier. A thunderbolt brewed in the clouds for a moment, and then crashed down. At the same time, the water level of the blessed fountain had already risen to become a lake, and a dark shadow became as thick as ink. The flood dragon was about to make its move. Then Ouyang Shang issued the second order, go. The 37 cultivators in a uniform posture turned around and ran away at lightning speed, scattering like birds and beasts. Chapter 486. Ouyang Shang was a radical but cautious person. Because of his radicalism, he did not hesitate to let his junior brothers and sisters, who were still immature, face the flood dragon that had cultivated for thousands of years. And because of his caution before the other party's details were clear, he would never really have a fierce fight with it. After killing the cannon fodder that was used to test the water, he would then force the flood dragon to make a move in a tough manner. This was the entire content of the first day of the battle. After forcing out the flood dragon, naturally, there would be cultivators of Spirit Sword sect who were good at observation to carry out a comprehensive observation of it, and then summarize the data, gradually enriching the flood dragon model in the battle plan. And when the completion of the flood dragon model exceeded 70%, they could really fight it. Before that, the task of the cultivators was to use every means to force the flood dragon to reveal more and more details. On the first day of the battle, Ouyang Shang made full use of the flood dragon's vigilance, putting up a stance of more than 30 people fighting it to the death, forcing the flood dragon to come out. However, the subsequent retreat meant that in the future, it would be difficult to lure the flood dragon again. But that was exactly what he wanted, because if the flood dragon didn't make a move, he could only send out shrimp soldiers and crab generals. If he could cut off its wings as much as possible before the decisive battle, turning it into a general without an army, the pressure on everyone in the decisive battle would be reduced a lot. Ouyang Shang's strategy had always been very complete. However, after the first day of the battle, when he summarized the information about the flood dragon, Ouyang Shang gradually frowned. In other words, according to your observation, the strength of this blessed fountain's flood dragon is probably stronger than the previous expectation? Wang Lu sighed. I'm afraid it's much stronger. If I'm not mistaken, this guy's inner core has already been cultivated into a Dragon Ball, and it's not just one. According to legend, in order to transform into a dragon, the inner core of the flood dragon must be cultivated into a Dragon Ball, and when 7 of them were gathered, it could transform into a true dragon. Of course, this process was very difficult. Every time the inner core was transformed into a Dragon Ball, it would trigger a heavenly tribulation. At the same time, after transforming the Dragon Ball, it had to cultivate a new inner core, which was tantamount to a new start, and it needed to face all kinds of difficulties. However, the successful transformation of each Dragon Ball meant that the flood dragon had taken a big step toward a true dragon, and its magical ability had made great progress. This time it only used its basic magical ability. The real card is still hidden. Moreover, even if it did not use its trump card with the strength of its second transition physical body, no one would be able to block its charge. Our plans must be adjusted, greatly adjusted. It is best to give up Blessed Fountain and change to Jadeite Forest. Ouyang Shang clenched his teeth. There's no need, a second stage flood dragon, according to the algorithm you provided, it's not impossible to defeat. On the contrary, if we can win this battle, our gains will be even greater. Wang Lu said, indeed, a mere second-level flood dragon is not a sure lose battle. However, it won't be easy to win either. Currently, the average level of the team needs to rise by at least 2 or 3 small levels, approaching a large level. At the very least, there can't be any trash at the peak of the foundation establishment stage in the team. Ouyang Shang said, half a year's time is enough for those 3 people to break through to the Shudan stage. As for the others, advancing 2 or 3 levels is not difficult. However, I have to change my leveling plan. Wang Lu looked down at the thousands of formulas and nodded. Bringing in the latest observed variables, the leveling time has only been extended by 2 months. After 8 months, the team's strength will be enough to defeat the second-level flood dragon. The problem is that during the leveling period, the risks will become difficult to control. Ouyang Shang said, yes, the results of the calculation have broken through the safe zone, and a lot of it. In this way, leveling without any losses can't be achieved, and I can't accept such casualties. With that, Ouyang Shang reached out and stirred up a few calculation symbols. After several calculations, he pursed his lips and said, According to our current strength, even if we change our tactics, it will be difficult to guarantee the safety of everyone while leveling. Wang Lu thoughtfully touched his chin. He felt that there seemed to be a very convenient solution to this problem, but he couldn't think of it for a while. At this time, Ouyang Shang began to calculate the environmental variables. I just found out that our current assessment of the environmental variables is not accurate enough. Since this 1,000-year-old flood dragon has mutated in the past few decades and produced 2 Dragon Balls, it is likely that the nearby monsters have a similar reaction. We have to spend more time cleaning up the encampment in addition to leveling to ensure safety. The impact on the overall efficiency should be. Hearing this, a light flashed in Wang Lu's mind. In that case, you might as well leave the problem to me. As he said that, he reached out his hand and tapped on one of the arithmetic talismans. The original red calculation result was erased. Forcibly erased? Ouyang Shang curiously asked. In other words, junior brother Wang Lu, you have enough confidence to solve the leveling safety problem? Well, leave it to me. Once there is a situation where the opponent is strong and difficult to resist, I will take action to protect everyone's safety. Of course, it will take some preparation time, so the leveling plan needs to be more stable. Ouyang Shang said, it doesn't matter. Let everyone save some strength and be ready to launch the tortoise shell array at any time. It will only slightly reduce the leveling speed. Wait a minute, we might as well adjust the leveling content and make full use of the extended time. In short, this problem has been solved for the time being. Let's start to discuss the next part. The biggest problem that troubled the team was skipped by Wang Lu in a few words, but Ouyang Shang was not surprised and gave Wang Lu a lot of trust. Next, the two began to really set out to enrich the leveling plan from a rough framework to a complete system. Whether it was Ouyang Shang or Wang Lu, this work would be very difficult to do alone. After all, the terrifying amount of calculation was still too heavy for a cultivator who had just entered the King Pill. Perhaps only Supreme Tian Luan of 10,000 Arts Sect had the computing ability to deal with it in an instant. However, when the two of them cooperated, they found that the efficiency of their work had been greatly improved, even more than the sum of the two of them. It was as if they were born with a wonderful tacit understanding. Whenever one of them encountered a difficulty in the calculation process, the other would have a burst of inspiration and report the answer. Both of them had amazing attainments in mathematics, and their thinking complemented each other. After a whole night of calculation, a thick stack of plans was completed. When the light of dawn shone from the horizon to the top of the mountain, the two of them looked at each other and smiled at the same time, and then sighed at the same time. Unfortunately, you are not a girl, otherwise it would be nice to be your Taoist companion. When the two of them finished speaking in unison, they could not help but be stunned, and then a deep regret welled up in their hearts. After a moment of silence, Ouyang Shang asked, speaking of which, I have recently been designing an immortal method that can change the sex of the body. At present, I have made some initial achievements. Wang Lu, are you interested in trying it? Why don't you try it yourself? The strength of your body is above mine. Obviously, you are more proficient in the field of the body than I am, so you are more suitable as a test subject. Ouyang Shang said confidently. It is precisely because of the high strength that the difficulty of changing the form is greater. And frankly speaking, I am temporarily conflicted about transsexualism. I can occasionally dress as a woman for entertainment, but transsexualism is out of the question. Ouyang Shang said with special regret, don't you want to think about it more? If the two of us become Taoist companions, it will be quite beneficial for you, at least your seniority will directly rise by 1 level. And I am the eldest senior brother of the same generation. If you follow me, your status will basically be equal to mine. When you transmigrate back and report my name, it is also very likely that you will directly take up the position of the head of the sect. At the very least, you will be an elder. Wang Lu said tit for tat, if I transmigrate back and people see that I have become a girl, I am afraid that I will not even be able to keep my position as the chief disciple. And the matter of becoming Taoist companions with you has no proof. You can't transmigrate back with me, so how can I win people's trust? Why don't you transform into a girl, and I will bring your falling red handkerchief back to show it to the elders. They will definitely prostrate themselves in admiration and jointly elect me as the head of the sect. Ouyang Shang sneered, falling red? What kind of person do you think I am? Even if this generation of Lingjian school keeps a low profile and doesn't communicate much with the outside world, but, aren't you looking down on me too much? Wang Lu was dumbfounded. You have actually, Ouyang Shang laughed and said, it's not a big deal, right? Have you forgotten my background? My dad is one of the best people in Lingjian school who knows how to enjoy life. Do you think I don't know how to enjoy life? And we are all adults, this kind of thing is not worth making a fuss about. Or Wang Lu, until now you still haven't. Wang Lu immediately stopped this topic. Junior sister is here? Ouyang Shang turned his head and looked. Sure enough, someone came over. It was the one in the team that he was most worried about. Wu, what's the matter? As soon as her voice fell, before Wang Wu could even react, she saw Wang Lu stagger back several steps, his face turning green and white. Wu, damn it, why do I get goosebumps all over my body when I hear this word? And my muscles are so numb as if they are crippled. Is this some kind of truth spell that contains a terrifying energy? Okay, I'll remember it. When I go back in time, I'll read it to my master and see how she reacts. On the other side, the two people who were talking didn't care about Wang Lu's abnormality. With an indifferent expression, Wang Wu said, I don't quite understand some parts of the cultivation method. I hope senior brother can give me some advice. Then, without waiting for Ouyang Shang to speak, Wang Wu started to talk about the problems in cultivation. Ouyang Shang smiled bitterly. This junior sister had always been cold to him. He didn't know how he had offended her. But since junior sister was asking for help from senior brother, he couldn't just ignore her. Ouyang Shang and Wang Wu's cultivation methods were different, but with the advantage of the realm, he quickly finished answering all the questions for Wang Wu. As the sect's senior brother, he was much more competent than Wang Lu in this regard, sparing no effort in guiding the younger generation. Then, thank you, senior brother. After Wang Wu remembered all the answers, she nodded to Ouyang Shang and turned to leave. She seemed even colder than before. Ouyang Shang was naturally somewhat helpless. But Wang Lu, who had been watching the whole process, discovered a terrifying fact. Wang Wu, who had turned her head, seemed to be slightly red. Chapter 487. Wang Wu's episode did not have much impact on the leveling plan. Wang Lu was a person who could distinguish priorities, so even though there were still thousands of questions he wanted to ask. For example, a young girl like you who was yearning for love, which finger do you usually use to solve your needs? Have you done a good disinfection and safety measures? His favorite fruit was bananas and his favorite vegetable was cucumbers. However, he endured it and did not delay leveling because of a temporary episode. At present, the most important thing was to improve the strength of the golden generation with all his strength. He must do better than the real history so that, when the catastrophe came, perhaps there would be a different result. Rest assured, with me here, everything will be different. With such awareness, Wang Lu bid farewell to the team at dawn and embarked on the journey alone. Ouyang Shang bid farewell to Wang Lu and also began to carry out his own task. After working hard all night yesterday, a preliminary leveling plan had been completed. Ouyang Shang distributed it to everyone and then, as expected, he got a sad voice. Big brother, don't be so exaggerated. Just the table of contents of the combat guide has been divided into such a thick stack, and the text has more than 100,000 words. You two have been discussing it all night. Are you writing a novel? The one who took the lead to complain was Yang Fei, who hated this kind of painstaking work the most. Big brother, you should know that I can't remember such a complicated thing. Ouyang Shang nodded. That's why I found a special tutor for you this time. I guarantee that you will be clear-headed and learn twice the result with half the effort. Yang Fei said, Ha, big brother, don't tease me. Even the reward giver elder said that since I cultivated my primordial Yang True Fire, my bad memory and impatience are incurable. Where can you find a special tutor to let me learn twice the result with half the effort? Ouyang Shang didn't say much and just snapped his fingers at a girl behind him. Junior sister, come. Then Kai Xia came over with an annoyed face and complained, Big brother, what's wrong with your brain? Was it a joke to come up with such a ridiculous plan? Apart from you, who else could remember and react in time? When she got closer, Kai Xia found that there was another person standing next to her big brother Ouyang Shang. However, when that person saw her, his face turned red and his neck was thick, as if he had constipation and hemorrhoids. He also deliberately turned his head, unwilling to look at her directly. Kai Xia sneered at this, a stupid face. Then he turned his head and asked Ouyang Shang, Hey big senior brother, you have to think about it carefully. It's fine if it's me, but there's still Yang Fei, this brain-dead and incurable idiot in the team. With his literacy level, he probably can't even read the battle plan that you've written, let alone understand it thoroughly. When the time comes, he'll definitely be a burden. Ouyang Shang smiled. That's why I asked you to help tutor him this time. Kai Xia still wanted to complain, but when she heard Ouyang Shang's words, she was stunned. What did you say? Ouyang Shang patiently repeated, I mean you'll tutor Yang Fei. Kai Xia suddenly exclaimed, are you kidding me? I don't want to get along with this fool. It's contagious. Yang Fei's face was so red that it almost turned purple, and even his eyes began to turn bloodshot. He looked very angry. It's not contagious. Kai Xia continued to protest, Senior brother, please spare me. I can't even learn it myself, how can I tutor others? Especially an idiot. If you want to tutor him, you can tutor him yourself. Aren't you the big brother? You're the best at guiding the younger generation. Ouyang Shang looked up at the sky and felt that if he continued to argue with his junior sister Kai Xia, he would not have enough time, so he lightly interrupted her, this is Big Brother's order. Big Brother's order again? Do you have to be so arbitrary? Yes. No matter how casual Kai Xia usually got along with Ouyang Shang, when Ouyang Shang seriously used his big brother's privilege, Kai Xia could only comply. Thus, she reluctantly approached Yang Fei and then opened the plan in her hand with flagging interest. She first looked at it and then asked without raising her head, is there anything you don't understand? If you don't understand, just ask. After not getting any response for a long time, Kai Xia glanced over and saw Yang Fei sitting next to her with a flushed face. He was also holding a plan in his hand, but his attention was not focused. His expression was painful and tangled, and he was also trying to move away at a subtle speed. Damn it, what the hell is wrong with this guy? How did I provoke him? Every time I meet him, he looks like he's a god of plague. Kai Xia hated Yang Fei because of this. Yang Fei's character was straightforward and generous, and his popularity was actually quite good. And the so-called brain-dead and incurable only meant that he couldn't bear to learn those particularly detailed things, not that he really had a defect in his IQ. But every time she got along with him, he always had a perverted face. How could Kai Xia not be angry? As for now, humph, it's better if he doesn't open his mouth. Anyway, although senior brother arranged for me to tutor him, he didn't say that I must tutor him well. If he refuses to cooperate like this, he can't blame me if he can't learn it in the end. Then Kai Xia no longer paid attention to Yang Fei and looked at the plan by herself, just like most of her companions on the summit at this time. The battle plan jointly designed by Ouyang Shang and Wang Lu was indeed too complicated. Even a cultivator with excellent aptitude would have to carefully memorize and comprehend it in order to have any harvest. However, Kai Xia's perception was not good, so she could only redouble her efforts. After a while, Kai Xia gradually felt her mind calm down, and then she entered the state of forgetting herself and everything else. After an unknown period of time, she recovered from her meditation, stretched out her body, and had a satisfied smile on her face. The effect of the meditation this time was better than expected. She had already mastered 1/10 of the entire plan. Although there were still many difficult areas that she didn't understand, it seemed that she would be able to master the whole plan in 7 or 8 days. It seemed that she wasn't that stupid after all. Kai Xia felt that her progress was good, so she relaxed a little. Especially when she saw that the red-faced man beside her was still thinking hard and puzzled, she couldn't help but feel even more proud. Hey, do you have a problem or not? This was a teasing question, but it got a serious answer. Junior sister Kai Xia, I indeed have something I don't understand. With that, he pointed to a page in the plan. This change, senior brother marked it as extremely important, but I can't really understand the meaning of it. Junior sister, please give me some advice. These words of Yang Fei were particularly heavy, as if he was reciting his last words. Kai Xia was too lazy to be angry now. She glanced at the plan and was ready to open her mouth to answer. Everyone started from the beginning and the front part was basically the same. And her progress was, of course, ahead of Yang Fei. The problems he encountered today should have been considered by her, so. Thinking about this, Kai Xia suddenly found that the page Yang Fei was pointing at was particularly strange. She blinked her eyes and once again confirmed that she had never seen that page before. Strange, could it be that even the common parts, senior brother treated them separately according to each person's characteristics? Do you need to be so detailed, I say? But after reading for a while, Kai Xia's face suddenly changed. Because she saw the part that Yang Fei had already turned over, it was a full 1/5 of the plan. You've already seen this part? What about the front, have you mastered it? Yang Fei turned his head sideways, looking particularly embarrassed. Yes. I've only seen this part. Although I've tried my best, the result is not very good. Kai Xia froze for a long time. Are you kidding me? The result is not very good? This is close to twice my efficiency and the result is not very good? You've seen my progress and deliberately pushed me, haven't you? However, it was at this time that Kaixia suddenly remembered. Before senior brother Yang Fei cultivated the true Yang fire, he was actually famous for being smart. It was just that after the true Yang fire burned his heart, it was very difficult for him to study at ease, which was why he was regarded as brainless and incurable. And just now, could it be that if it was the normal Yang Fei, his perception was indeed above Kaixia. But when she thought that the usually stupid Yang Fei was actually above her, Kaixia felt that it was particularly intolerable. You think about it yourself first. If you really can't think it through, I'll tell you the answer. With that, Kaixia angrily flipped through her own plan, almost gnashing her teeth as she read, memorized every formula, and constantly deduced it in her mind. This time, she entered the state of forgetting herself and the world, faster than the last time, and her mind became clearer. In the distance, Ouyang Shang, who witnessed all of this, slightly smiled. It's really good to be young. This group of junior brothers and sisters are really cute. That was all he could do for now. About 3 days later, I will lead the team to enter Blessed Fountain again, and that time it will be a life and death battle. The second level Flood Dragon will not let me escape so easily again. In the last fight, not only was I observing the Flood Dragon was also observing these cultivators. The details of me and the others have basically been seen through. According to my own calculation, the next time we fight, even if my junior brothers and sisters are well prepared, the risk index will far exceed the limit value. The Flood Dragon's first all-out attack is bound to be like a storm, and the Golden Generation who have not experienced the baptism of wind and frost are far from its opponent. At that time, the best result is nothing more than to struggle at death's door with the tortoise shell array that was specially taught by the sect. But after seeing the Flood Dragon's ability to stir up trouble, Ouyang Shang had no doubt that the other party could completely trap the tortoise shell array with the tortoise shell array in an instant. This was an opponent that should not have been touched. The more effort the junior brothers and sisters put in, the greater the gap will be when the desperate situation comes. And at that time, there was only one person who could reverse everything. Until he left, the man who claimed to be a time traveler did not fully reveal his plan. When the second-level Flood Dragon went crazy, how could he turn the tide with his own strength? Ouyang Shang was really curious. Chapter 488. 3 days later, in the sky above Blessed Fountain, more than 30 cultivators of Spirit Sword sect assembled. Before they arrived, their awe-inspiring sword intent had already shrouded the sky, like a solid cage. Led by the top King Pil Ouyang Shang, the team of more than 30 elites of Spirit Sword sect did indeed have the ability to seal the sky. The aftermath of the magical power of more than 30 people could make the birds unable to spread their wings and the beasts not dare to roar. However, all of this was meaningless in front of the giant beast in the depths of Blessed Fountain. The condensed sword intent of more than 30 people could turn into a substance that could penetrate gold and stone, but it could not set off a ripple on the fountain. At this moment, the team of Spirit Sword sect seemed to be infinitely awe-inspiring. Once the Flood Dragon revealed his true form, he could single-handedly kill them all. However, they still came. Although 3 days was not enough to fully digest the huge battle plan, and although Ouyang Shang did not understand how Wang Lu was going to use the last insurance up until the moment before departure, it seemed that they almost came to throw away their lives. But this was the golden generation of Lingjian school, pursuing the extreme growth under extreme conditions, dreaming of completing the rise of Spirit Sword sect in one generation. According to the normal history, they had paid the price for their radicalism. But this time, would the situation be different? The Flood Dragon is really cunning and cautious. Last time he has already seen through our details. This time we are even more unreserved. It stands to reason that he clearly has the absolute advantage, but he still refuses to take the initiative to come forward. In mid-air, Ouyang Shang somewhat helplessly sighed. He led the team to assemble in the air, hoping to lock the battlefield in the air, in order to avoid the opponent's geographical advantage in the water. Although when the Flood Dragon stirred up the wind and waves, the rainstorm almost ran through the clouds and the ground into a violent river, it was still much better than going deep into Blessed Fountain. However, the Flood Dragon seemed to have seen through their plan, so he stubbornly defended his home. For the cruel Flood Dragon, it was impossible for him to indulge the provocateurs. He was sure that these human cultivators would take the initiative to come to his door, so he just waited for them to exhaust themselves. There's no other way, I'll do it myself. As soon as Ouyang Shang's voice fell, his figure disappeared in the air. The next moment, his feet had already stepped on the cobblestones on the shore of Blessed Fountain. The sharp sword in his hand was like a mirror, reflecting the surface of blessed fountain, shining brightly. But it was at this moment that the scenery on the shore suddenly changed. The shore under Ouyang Shang's feet was like a dry towel that had been soaked in water, suddenly collapsing and softening. The surrounding soil surged up high, as if a giant beast was opening its mouth to devour people. The cultivators flying in the air saw it clearly, and their faces couldn't help but change. Because what Ouyang Shang was stepping on wasn't a shore, but a camouflaged aquatic beast. It was a giant octopus the size of a small mountain. What soared into the sky, forming a cage that covered the sky and the sun, was the octopus' thick and powerful tentacles. And it opened its huge mouth right under Ouyang Shang's feet, and the strong corrosive digestive fluid surged up like boiling magma. As soon as the octopus appeared, its demonic energy overflowed in all directions, and a gust of chilly wind blew by, not to mention the pressure it suffered in the tentacle cage. This was a powerful monster with a mature inner core comparable to Taoist Master King Pill. Moreover, it deliberately launched a sneak attack. Even Taoist Master King Pill could easily fall into its trap. However, the cultivators of Spirit Sword Sect saw this change, but they didn't move. According to the battle plan, in a situation like this, no matter how big the crisis Ouyang Shang encountered, they must not rashly support him. Because it was likely that they would fall into the trap of besieging Wei to rescue Zhao and suffer a heavier loss. Moreover, the one who encountered the crisis was not someone else but Ouyang Shang, and he would not die that easily. Sure enough, the next moment the octopus cage closed, a light soared into the sky and directly penetrated the ceiling of the cage. The corrosive fluid splashed in all directions, bringing forth a plume of smoke. The octopus suffered a heavy blow and screamed incessantly. It tried to retract its tentacles, trying to trap them inside. However, the next moment, the screams came to an abrupt end, and the cage wrapped by the octopus suddenly expanded and then burst. Inside the cage, a solid hill stood majestically. Ouyang Shang stood on the top of the hill, and his feet sunk into the rocks as if a mountain god had descended. In addition to swordsmanship, Ouyang Shang was best at the ground shrinking technique, which was also the earth escape technique. His use of earth element spell could be said to have reached the pinnacle. Using brute force to summon the mountain, he directly burst the King Pill level octopus. In the end, the flood dragon of Blessed Fountain still underestimated Ouyang Shang. His stage was indeed only low-level King Pill, but among the King Pill level cultivators in the entire 9 regions, the number of people who could defeat him was no more than 1/10. Of course, no matter how strong the King Pill was, it was still just a King Pill. Ouyang Shang's sword strike broke the enemy's defense, but he also received the counterforce, which caused his face to change slightly. This change was keenly captured by the observer hidden under the water. The death of its general was no doubt a loss, but the death of the octopus also made it completely put down its vigilance. The strength of the other side's leader was only SOSO. Even killing the octopus in seconds would cause it to be injured, so its strength was nothing to be afraid of. And it seemed that they didn't have more cards in their hand. That being the case, it was his turn to have a good meal. The moment after the octopus was eaten, the sky above Blessed Fountain was covered with dark clouds, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The sword intent blockade formed by more than 30 cultivators suddenly shattered. The water level of Blessed Fountain rose, and in an instant, it submerged the surrounding area of 10 miles, forming an amazing lake. The shadow of a black dragon surged in the lake. Ouyang Shang's complexion changed. He immediately dispersed the rock under his feet and prepared to ride his sword into the sky. However, at this time a thunderbolt fell from the sky. As a last resort, he once again pulled out his sword and pointed it at the sky. The lightning collapsed and Ouyang Shang was also pressed down into the water. The part below his knees was immediately submerged. At this time the clear water of Blessed Fountain was as black as ink and extremely viscous, so Ouyang Shang could not break free. At this time the cultivators in the sky also began to move and began to rescue him. In the plan, only when Ouyang Shang was besieged by the small fries could they just stand by and watch. If the flood dragon made a move and they still did not help, then it would be considered as deliberate murder. When they made their move, everyone acted in an orderly manner and did not rush forward. With Yang Fei as the leader, the cultivators who were the best at attacking the battlefield immediately launched their strongest attack at several key points of the battlefield. The second-level cultivators, after a short pause, each cast their own spells as the first wave of additional attacks. Whether it was against the dark clouds above their heads, or trying to channel the suddenly rising water, everyone was actually fighting their own battles. Their tasks were different, and they had never had any cooperation drills before. However, in this first actual combat their cooperation was flawless. The natural tacit understanding of the Golden Generation allowed them to snatch back the initiative in the first moment. Thanks to the help of his junior brothers and sisters, Ouyang Shang broke free from the shackles of the black water of Blessed Fountain and soared into the sky. The thunderbolt that fell on his head was diverted by several junior brothers and sisters who were good at attracting thunder, so that Ouyang Shang could successfully return to the team and was not trapped in the water. Because according to the original plan, no matter what, they could not fight with the flood dragon underwater. If Ouyang Shang was really firmly bound in the water, the others would have to endure it no matter how unwilling they were. Fortunately, things did not develop in the worst direction. However, this time the flood dragon immediately used a stronger force. The shadow under the water suddenly sprang out of the water and went straight to the cultivators in the sky. It used the power of its main body. In the face of this unusually fierce flood dragon, Ouyang Shang did not hesitate at all. He raised his hand high and clenched his fist, which was one of the pre-agreed secret signals. As he clenched his fist, more than 30 people moved at an astonishing speed. They quickly gathered together, connected their magical power, and with Ouyang Shang as the pivot, they advanced and retreated together. After that, a yellow circular light shield lit up, wrapping everyone inside like an eggshell. This was the strongest life-saving unique skill designed and taught by the elders of the sect before the Golden Generation came out of the mountain, the tortoise-shell array. It was a special array that gathered everyone's strength and pushed the defensive power to the extreme. At its peak, more than 100 cultivators of the Golden Generation joined hands to form an array, which could even make a Taoist Master of Deity stage feel a little tricky. At this time, although the array was not complete, the second-level Flood Dragon was far inferior to a Taoist Master of Deity stage. As soon as the tortoise-shell array came out, everyone should be in an invincible position. The Flood Dragon could not leave Blessed Fountain for a long time. Sooner or later it would withdraw. At that time, the first actual combat would be successfully completed. However, things did not go as smoothly as expected. The black behemoth rushed out of the water, opened its bloody mouth, and its 2 rows of sharp teeth rapidly expanded in front of everyone, and it seemed that it would expand endlessly. Ouyang Shang discovered that they seemed to have misjudged the size of the Flood Dragon. The previous observations were separated by a layer of Blessed Fountain water, so they did not really see the whole picture of the Flood Dragon. This was a supergiant beast whose size could be compared to a mountain. The tortoise-shell array formed by more than 30 people was quite large, but the Flood Dragon swallowed everyone. It's really an unexpected means. In the dim light, Ouyang Shang helplessly sighed. With the faint light of the tortoise-shell array, they could barely see the surrounding environment. At this time they were inside the Flood Dragon's body, surrounded by a black and red meat wall, and the tortoise shell was like an eggshell, soaked in a strong digestive fluid. No one thought that the Flood Dragon would use such a trick. Senior brother, do you want to open the shield and then destroy the inside? In the team, Kai Xiao frowned and suggested. No, that's just seeking death. With the strength of the enemy and us, the tortoise shell array must not be opened. The inside of the Flood Dragon is indeed one of its weaknesses, but we don't have enough power to take advantage of this weakness. Ouyang Shang said, pointing to the surrounding digestive fluid, but none of us can deal with it alone. But sooner or later we will run out of oil. This Flood Dragon's body is full of miasma and poisonous water. We can't use the surrounding spiritual energy to replenish our magical power. Ouyang Shang helplessly nodded. Continuing to waste time was a dead end, but not wasting time? That would only make them die faster. Or to put it simply, right now more than 30 of them were finished. It was exactly the same as the calculation before the war. Against the second-level Flood Dragon, their current level simply could not control the risk, and they could easily be forced into a dead end. Only through actual combat could the strength of the junior brothers and sisters advance by leaps and bounds, and then they could truly compete with this Flood Dragon. As for now, Ouyang Shang raised his head and could only count on junior brother Wang Lu, who had mysteriously disappeared before the war. However, even if it was him, what could he do in the face of the current situation? Even if his strength was 10 times stronger, it was impossible for him to make the Flood Dragon spit out the things in its stomach. However, at this time, a huge force suddenly surged inside the Flood Dragon's body, and the digestive fluid turned into a rolling wave that pushed the tortoise shell array outward. Ouyang Shang only saw a blur before he was spat out of the Flood Dragon's body. This sudden change was simply inexplicable. The Flood Dragon was cruel and greedy by nature, how could it feed back the food it swallowed? The next moment, seeing the anger and panic in the flood dragon's eyes, which were bigger than ordinary courtyards, Ouyang Shang suddenly understood something. Turning his head on the distant horizon, a black tide swept over. It was a huge coalition army composed of an unknown number of powerful monsters, most of which came from the surrounding vital areas. For example, the human-faced owl beasts of Jadeite Forest, the cursed spirits of Mirror Mound. These monsters should have minded their own business and never interfered with each other, but at this time, they gathered together and aggressively rushed toward the direction of Blessed Fountain. No wonder the flood dragon spat them out. In the face of such an aggressive opponent whose comprehensive strength was far above its own, it might not necessarily win even if it fought with all its strength, so how could it allow the existence of foreign objects in its body? But, why did so many monsters suddenly come to find trouble with the flood dragon? Ouyang Shang looked into the distance, searching hard in the black tide and finally found the answer. An answer that made him suck in a mouthful of cold air. At the forefront of the black tide, Wang Lu stepped on his flying sword and laughed wildly. I am Fire Chariot King. Chapter 489. In the distance, the dark beast tide attracted everyone's attention. Whether it was the cultivators of Spirit Sword sect who had escaped from death or the ferocious second-level flood dragon, all of them focused their attention on the distance, turning a blind eye to the enemy near them. Most of the monsters that made up the beast tide were not very strong individually, but the beast tide swept all the way from the distant horizon. The soaring demonic energy even scattered the dense dark clouds that were rolled up by the flood dragon. It was just that after the dark clouds dispersed there was no sunlight. The blue sky was covered by the demonic energy of thousands of monsters, turning into a mournful bloody color, which made people shudder. In theory, no one could face such a ferocious beast tide. However, right in front of the beast tide, Wang Lu, who was standing on the sword of Mount Kuan, laughed out loud with ease. Just behind him, 7 or 8 terrifying giant beasts were constantly biting, waving their claws or spitting out flames and acid mist. Yet they could not hurt Wang Lu in the slightest. Witnessing this scene, Ouyang Shang's eyes widened, and his ever-changing intelligent mind actually somewhat stagnated. How the hell did this guy do it? Moreover, did he not want his life anymore? After a few days of getting along, Ouyang Shang had long known that although Wang Lu excelled in attack and defense, his speed was actually his weakness. In theory, he could not do this kind of job of luring monsters because there were too many monsters that were faster than him. However, now it seemed that he had concealed his considerable strength before because at this time, his flying sword speed was so fast that even Ouyang Shang, who was known for his speed, was ashamed of his inferiority. With such a powerful attack and defense speed, Wang Lu was simply inhuman. However, the next moment, Ouyang Shang's eyes widened even more, and he even exclaimed, "What the hell, it's actually like this?" His meticulous eyesight allowed him to see through the truth of Wang Lu's amazing speed. It turned out that whenever the monster behind Wang Lu launched an attack, Wang Lu would just stretch out his finger, resist it with his non-phase sword chi, and then use the recoil force to sprint forward. Behind him were countless monsters who bore the brunt of the storm of attacks. However, he was able to firmly support his non-phase sword defense. Not only could he protect himself, he could also use the impact to maintain his position at the head of the team, pulling the army of monsters behind him to his heart's content. However, playing such tricks in front of the beast tide was like dancing on a tightrope. If he was the slightest bit careless, his sword defense would be broken, and Wang Lu would die a horrible death. But he really dared to play like this and he succeeded. However, he didn't have much time to think. Wang Lu had already led the beast tide over. Ouyang Shang immediately led his junior brothers and sisters to the side to avoid being caught in the crossfire. Even if the flood dragon of Blessed Fountain had the intention to stop them, he didn't dare to divert his attention to break the tortoiseshell array. Under the impact of this violent beast tide, the only thing he could do was to protect his hometown. The next moment, the flood dragon looked up to the sky and let out a long roar. The lake under his body rose and soared straight into the sky. In an instant, it was as if the Milky Way was hanging upside down, and the water curtain covered the sky. However, the water of Blessed Fountain was, after all, endless. Under the control of the flood dragon's magical power, it continued to expand upward. After a while, the lake water became as thin as mist, and the Blessed Fountain Valley was filled with mist. Then, just as the beast tide arrived, the mist suddenly dispersed, and the valley restored its original clarity. But at the same time, The flood dragon disappeared along with his hometown blessed fountain, disappeared without a trace. Wang Lu, who took the lead in pulling the train, was taken aback, but he didn't dare to slow down his movement. He continued to prop up his non-phase sword defense and led the beast tide to fly away from the original position of blessed fountain. However, he knew in his heart that this earth-shattering blow did not have any effect. The flood dragon had already escaped. Mirage, what a powerful illusion. In the distance, Ouyang Shang softly praised. He had a panoramic view of the spell launched by the flood dragon at the last moment and quickly deciphered its mystery. It was simple to say. It was nothing more than using the water level of Blessed Fountain as a primer, plus the spiritual power of the feng shui line that he had been controlling here for many years to launch an astonishing water element illusion to hide his hometown and mislead the beast tide to rush to other places. This illusion, in the eyes of human cultivators, could be called exquisite. It was most likely the life-saving trick that this cunning and cautious flood dragon had arranged here for many years. Once it was cast, those irrational monsters immediately fell into the trap. If those tens of millions of beasts were deliberately targeting the flood dragon, perhaps they could remain unmoved, but their goal was, after all, Wang Lu. Seeing that the Train King tactic did not work, Wang Lu slightly eased his rhythm and then took out a heavenly talisman from his mustard seed bag. With a shake of his hand, the talisman dispersed, and the next moment his figure disappeared without a trace. Before he set off, he had modified the talisman in his hand and changed the gathering place to another safe place. The beast tide suddenly lost its target. The power of the spirit sword heavenly talisman was far stronger than these monsters, so they had no way to track it. And after these irrational monsters lost their target, they began to kill each other, leaving behind a bloody storm in the sky before gradually dispersing. While the beast tide was fighting with each other, Wang Lu and Ouyang Shang had already met at the agreed place. Haha, feel good? Listening to Wang Lu's laughter, Ouyang Shang also smiled back. Gladly. Originally he was going to ask whether he was injured or not, but it seemed like, even if he was injured, he didn't want others to know, right? Therefore, Ouyang Shang simply stopped asking and directly expressed his admiration. Whether it was the non-phase sword defense that withstood the beast tide, or the bold and unconstrained imagination and boldness that dared to plan this action, Wang Lu had already shown his extraordinary and refined place. In the Yangtze River, the new generation surpasses the old. Ouyang Shang sighed with emotion. As the big brother of the golden generation, his strength and quality could be said to be the best among his peers in 9 regions, but this Wang Lu seemed to be even better than him. The future of Lingjian School was really something to look forward to. After listening to Ouyang Shang's praise, Wang Lu smiled and waved his hand. Don't worry, I'm not interested in pushing men. If Brother Ouyang is willing to change your body or something, then I can consider it. Ouyang Shang was silent for a moment, and then changed the topic. How did you lure those monsters out of the mountain? Can it be repeated? According to Ouyang Shang's previous understanding of the savage land, there were many monsters here, but a second-level flood dragon with a certain level of wisdom was very rare. Although most of the monsters were tyrannical, they only acted by instinct, and there was not much difference between them and the animals in the mortal world. Therefore, for thousands of years, no decent civilization had been established in the savage land. It was like a wasteland, which was how the name Savage Land came about. By the way, in sharp contrast, there was the eastern border region and the southern heaven region. There were many countries established by monsters in these two regions. After thousands of years of development, they lived in harmony with human beings. Of course, if not, Lingjian School would not send more than 100 disciples into the savage land for actual combat training. To enter a mature civilized territory and start a massacre was a big taboo of the Wanxian League. The characteristics of the savage land allowed the golden generation to display their fists and feet to their heart's content. To put it in an extreme way, if they had the ability to directly erase the savage land from 9 regions with their world-destroying immortal method, that was also their ability. According to the practice, the savage land had always been under the jurisdiction of Lingjian School. What the cultivators of Spirit Sword sect did in the savage land was the internal affairs of the sect. However, conversely, it also made every step of the cultivation in the savage land dangerous. There was basically no safe place. Any passing monster could launch an attack on them, so their vigilant nerves were always tense. The top of the mountain, where they were temporarily stationed, was a very rare safe zone. At the same time, most of the monsters in the savage land had a strong territorial consciousness. They usually just defended their own territory, not allowing outsiders to invade, nor would they easily invade other places. Therefore, when the flood dragon was provoked for the first time, he didn't even think about pursuing them. Once Ouyang Shang and the others escaped from the territory of Blessed Fountain, the flood dragon stopped in time. Therefore, Ouyang Shang found it very strange how Wang Lu could gather so many monsters and pull them out of their nest. Haha, drawing hatred is my specialty, inciting a group of brainless monsters is too easy, okay? Ouyang Shang asked with interest, how do you do it? I'm afraid the specific method will cause discomfort to the listener, so I suggest senior brother not to listen. Wang Lu grinned, but his 2 rows of snow-white teeth looked slightly ferocious. Upon hearing this, Ouyang Shang was startled, and then a hint of inspiration emerged in his mind. If it were him, what would he do? Let the monsters go beyond their instinct to protect their territory and chase after them, then, most likely it was because of the hatred of killing their wives and children, right? Then in today's beast tide, most of them seemed to have cubs. Forget it, this problem was indeed like what Wang Lu said, it was better not to think too much about it. In short, thanks to your help this time, we were not completely wiped out. However, after being frightened by your beast tide, I'm afraid that no matter how we provoke the flood dragon, it will not easily step out of Blessed Fountain again. Wang Lu smiled again, I've considered this problem before, and it's actually not difficult to solve. You see, that Blessed Fountain is not stagnant water, the water doesn't come out of thin air. As long as we poison upstream, we don't have to worry about not being able to force them out. Ouyang Shang touched his chin, but ordinary poisons can't do anything to the black dragon, right? What's more, Blessed Fountain is their base, so it has the ability to purify water. So, the poison must be effective as long as it can infuriate the other party, it's the same. Upon hearing this, Ouyang Shang frowned, I say you're not thinking of throwing sh*t into other people's water. Wang Lu laughed, worthy of being senior brother Ouyang, we have a tacit understanding. I really think so, throwing sh*t into Blessed Fountain. You see, our Blessed Fountain strategy will last for at least 8 months. During this period, junior brothers and sisters, in addition to cultivating, they must eat and drink, right? It's not like everyone has achieved fasting. In my opinion, in order to ensure everyone's diet, why don't we build a breeding plant nearby? Not only can it provide enough fresh meat, but it can also provide enough feces. It's killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Junior brother, seeing your shameless face, I suddenly have a trace of concern for the future of Lingjian School. 3 days later, Blessed Fountain Dragon Palace. After experiencing a beast tide scare, the master of this place was recuperating, closing his eyes to meditate. Suddenly, from outside the Dragon Palace, a slender and sleek young black dragon swam in. Reporting to father, something bad has happened. The flood dragon opened his golden eyes and said in a deep voice, those human cultivators are provoking us again? Humph, let them be. But, no buts, no matter how they provoke us, we have to endure it for now. Human cultivators have always been cunning and despicable, there's no need to fall into their trap. As long as we keep our home, they have no time to waste with us. As a rare intelligent monster in the savage land, the flood dragon had indeed seen through the biggest problem of the cultivators of Spirit Sword sect. Time was precious. Unfortunately, he ultimately underestimated the opponent's means. But father, those humans actually discharged a large amount of feces and sewage along the Feng Shui spring. What did you say? They directly threw sh*t into the water. Damn it, I'll kill them all today. Little ones, attack with all your might. Chapter 490. Many people were curious. There were so many intelligent creatures in 9 regions, among which there was no lack of amazing aptitude in cultivation, and there were even immortal beasts that were born with infinite magical power. Why did human beings eventually rule the world? Some people said that human cultivation speed was fast, some people said that human beings had a strong sense of innovation, and some people with thick skin claimed that human beings were favored by heaven and had great luck. In Wang Lu's view, the actual reason was very simple. Human beings were far more shameless than other creatures, and in this world, shameless people were invincible. As one of the best human cultivators, Wang Lu was well aware of the charm of this method. The shit-throwing tactic that he proposed had refreshed the worldview of many of his junior brothers and sisters, but the effect was undoubtedly good. Almost as soon as the plan was executed, the water level of Blessed Fountain rose sharply, and dozens of dark figures emerged from the water. This time, the second-level flood dragon really turned out in full force, vowing to kill this group of shameless human beings. In the last fight, the flood dragon was very clear about the limit of the opponent's strength. That tortoise-shell array did have some skill, but it was not only human beings who knew array. He had been operating in Blessed Fountain for hundreds of years, and his dragon children and grandchildren could also be used to set up the array. 36 dragon children and grandchildren could form the coiling dragon array, which was omnipotent in both offense and defense. Although it was impossible to be more exquisite than the array of human cultivators, under the absolute advantage of strength, it was enough to become a weight to determine the victory. However, just as the flood dragon rushed out of the water with anger, what he saw was not the tortoise-shell array formed by the cultivators of Spirit Sword sect, but, damn it, it's here again? On the horizon, the rolling black tide surged again, and Wang Lu, who was standing in the eye of the storm, burst into laughter. Haha, I still King Fire. Chariot. King. While laughing, Wang Lu, pushed by the tide behind him, had already arrived in front of the flood dragon. At this distance, as long as the flood dragon made a surprise attack, it could pose a fatal threat to Wang Lu. The strength of the flood dragon and those monsters behind Wang Lu were on a completely different level. Although it could not fight against the beast tide, it could hit Wang Lu hard. However, after killing Wang Lu, he would have to face the beast tide head-on. The flash of hesitation made the flood dragon lose his last chance. Wang Lu had led the beast tide to completely lock the flood dragon and his hometown in Blessed Fountain. My dear flood dragon, I want you to know that this beast tide is all yours. Then the second Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman was launched, and Wang Lu's figure instantly disappeared. The beasts that were stimulated by Wang Lu to lose their mind originally only had Wang Lu in their eyes. But when Wang Lu disappeared, their eyes suddenly opened up, leaving only the Blessed Fountain Flood Dragon and his coiling dragon array. The shift of hatred happened in an instant. This time, the Flood Dragon didn't even have the time to spread out the thick fog and use the water element illusion technique to lure the opponent because the beast tide was too close. Just as he was about to speak, a strange beast with a pair of wings on its back and a horn on its head roared and rushed over. The horn almost flipped over the Flood Dragon's scales. The pain in his body had completely angered the overlord of Blessed Fountain. Alright, let this group of beasts understand who the master of this great Artemisia mountain is. The angry roar of the dragon shook the earth. The second-level flood dragon no longer flinched. Instead, he mobilized all the power he had accumulated in the deep waters of Blessed Fountain for hundreds of years to confront the rolling beast tide head-on. The dark beast tide was instantly dyed red with blood. The water level of Blessed Fountain soared, and the trickle turned into a lake. The waves of the lake were like the ocean, but the seawater was dark red. TSK, what an earth-shattering battle. On the distant mountain top, a group of people from Lingjian School leisurely watched. Their location had been covered with layers of arrays, which blocked the perception of all the monsters. This array was arranged in a hurry, but the effect was not inferior to the second-level Flood Dragon's Fata Morgana. At this time, the battle between the Beast Tide and the Flood Dragon had entered a white-hot stage. Both sides were in a killing frenzy. The tyrannical power raged unstoppably in the Great Song Mountain. Every moment there were corpses falling from the sky. Some of the corpses had weak bodies and were turned into minced meat by the aftermath of the spells. As for those with strong bodies, after falling into the sea of blood of Blessed Fountain, they would eventually melt and disintegrate, turning into a bloody energy source to support the flood dragons and fighting against the many enemies. The war between the monsters did not break out, but once it started, it would absolutely not end until one side was dead. The loser would die and the roots would be exterminated. It was just that the two sides had already reached such a situation, but no one had discovered that on the neighboring mountains, a group of human cultivators were watching with cold eyes. There was no doubt about the gap between human cultivators and the innate magical powers of the monsters. However, even if they were on the winning side, witnessing the bloody battle on the Great Song Mountain and smelling the stench of the wind, it was difficult for them to really relax and be a spectator. For these young people who spent most of their time cultivating in the mountains, the scene in front of them was too exciting. This kind of vision can only be experienced in the savage land. It is really an eye-opener. I can't control my excitement. A burly young cultivator gently shook his head, as if he was deeply touched. On the other hand, he reached out and touched a few dried fruits on the plate in front of him. He quickly peeled off the shells and put the nuts into his mouth. With that skillful movement, it was hard to tell whether his attention was on the battle in the distance or the plate in front of him. I say, junior brother Yang, if you are not interested, you don't have to force yourself. Just pretend to be interested and watch. No one is eating the dried fruits on the table, they are all yours. Upon hearing this, Yang Fei laughed and said, "Thank you for your generosity, senior brother. I'm really not interested in watching. Isn't it just animals killing each other and dogs biting each other? There's nothing to see except the flesh and blood." Before Ouyang Shang could say anything, he heard the unpolite voice of a girl beside him. "What an idiot. I say, Kai Xia, that's enough. Recently, I feel like you've been targeting me." Ouyang Shang sighed and decided to block out the flirting between the two of them. In fact, at this time, most people were still seriously watching the fierce battle on the Great Song Mountain. Most of these monsters were not of high rank. In addition to their innate magical powers, they didn't have any great acquired cultivation methods. In addition to being good at using their bodies and magical powers, they didn't have any skills worth watching. However, hundreds of monsters were fighting with no thought of personal safety, using their own flesh and blood to perform the reincarnation of life and death. This was a rare sight even for the disciples of the five uniques. Careful observation could effectively temper a cultivator's state of mind. The previously designated battle plan had deviated a lot in the previous two actions, but Ouyang Shang, as the eldest senior brother, could make timely adjustments to ensure that the team would not waste time because of this. And so far, the battle initiated by Wang Lu had indeed played a role. In just a short period of time, 4 or 5 junior brothers and sisters seemed to have realized something while watching the battle and began to close their eyes to meditate. Presumably, when they opened their eyes again, their Taoist heart would become more solid and refined. Of course, there were also a few people who didn't fall for this trick. Rough people like Yang Fei were one of them, and there was also, turning his head, Ouyang Shang helplessly saw 2 people who were also not in the mood to watch the battle chatting. To be precise, one person was chatting and the other person was being chatted. "I say, Xiaowu, it's not right for you to cultivate like this. Cultivation is a comprehensive thing. In addition to meditating on magical power and tempering the primordial spirit, you should also broaden your horizons and strengthen your practice. Only in this way can you grow in an all-round way. If you rely on fate to accumulate magical power, at most, you can only end up in a situation of high magical power but low ability." Wang Lu's voice seemed to be sincere and earnest, but Ouyang Shang felt that there was a strong sense of teasing in it. However, when Wang Wu heard the topic of cultivation, she became slightly serious. She opened her eyes, stopped her meditation, turned her head, and expressed her curiosity with her clear eyes. After chatting for so long, it was rare for Wang Lu to get a response, so he immediately explained with great interest. "For a woman, the key is not in the cultivation stage but in the face and figure. Actually, your talent is not bad. As long as you diligently cultivate, sooner or later, you can become a beautiful young model, femme fatale. Of course, it's really not easy to cultivate the beauty technique. In your current situation, your cultivation foundation is still not solid, so you shouldn't be distracted too much. Therefore, I have a set of quick-fix methods for you to refer to," Wang Lu said, and then took out a set of very suspicious-looking clothes from his mustard seed bag. This magical set of clothes is called the shaping underwear. As long as you wear it, you can gradually have a good figure without deliberately cultivating it. Are you tempted after hearing it? Do you really want it? It doesn't matter, we're all from the same spirit sword sect. If you don't want the 998, I'll give it to you for free," Wang Lu said, and very generously patted Wang Wu's shoulder, completely ignoring the fact that this kind of intimate behavior made the latter obviously uncomfortable. However, this shaping underwear is not permanent. The magical power contained in it is limited. After it's used up, it will need to be replaced. But don't worry, we're all from the same sect, so I'll maintain it for you for free. As long as you give me the worn underwear, I'll exchange the old for the new. Isn't it very affordable? Ouyang Shang sighed, thinking that this conversation was too shameless. He really couldn't figure out what this young man, who claimed to be a time traveler, saw in Wang Wu. These few days, as long as he had time, he would launch a frenzied harassment offensive, simply never tired of it. It could be said that Wang Lu was in love, but it seemed that he was simply teasing and harassing, without the slightest intention to further develop a relationship. Moreover, Wang Lu's eyes were clear and spotless. Even when he was holding that kind of perverted underwear, he didn't seem to have any evil intentions at all. And to be honest, junior sister Wang Wu's pure charm as a woman was also very weak because of her excessive carelessness. At present, there were many junior sisters in the team who were better than her in terms of figure and appearance, but Wang Lu simply turned a blind eye to them. In addition, as for the relationship between the two, other than the same surname, there was actually nothing else in common. The two's facial features and appearance were very different. As for the relationship between master and disciple, Wang Lu's cultivation method was unheard of, but the defense system vaguely had a trace of Lingjian school's charm. And Wang Wu was limited by her aptitude, so she cultivated a rather popular low-end cultivation method in Lingjian school. No matter in any aspect, it had nothing to do with Wang Lu's inheritance. However, according to Wang Lu's current performance, in his history line, among the few survivors of the Golden Generation, there should be a place for Wang Wu. Speaking of which, it was really inconceivable. What kind of disaster could cause so many people to die at the same time? Even he couldn't escape, but Wang Wu survived? But this was also good. Ouyang Shang raised his head, and his gaze gradually turned to the distant sky. This was also good. If she survived, it was also very good. Chapter 491. Driving the tiger to swallow the wolf was not the original plan. Initially, provoking the monsters around the Great Song Mountain to contend against the flood dragon of Blessed Fountain was just a means for Wang Lu to escort the disciples of Spirit Sword sect at the critical moment. And this trick did have an effect. But now, it seemed that the effect of this trick was likely to be better than expected. The second time, driving the tiger to swallow the wolf, was initially just to weaken the strength of the flood dragon, and it was best to let it adapt to the current level of Spirit Sword sect's cultivators. Otherwise, every time there was a fatal crisis, if Wang Lu had to be the king to attract the monsters sooner or later, there would be an accident. As a result, no one thought that this battle actually turned into a life-and-death battle between the two groups of monsters. This was actually far beyond the expectation. The second-level flood dragon lived in Blessed Fountain, and it was undoubtedly the strongest within hundreds of miles. It could also vaguely be regarded as the overlord of this place. The monsters that settled around Blessed Fountain had a deep fear of it, and usually they would never provoke the flood dragon. Therefore, according to Wang Lu's initial expectation, he would attract the hatred, and then escape from the battle with the heavenly talisman. The beast tide would transfer the hatred, and it was inevitable that they would fight the flood dragon, but soon, under the suppression of the natural rank difference, they would scatter like birds and beasts. During this period, the strength of the flood dragon would inevitably be weakened, but it couldn't be expected to be weakened too much. However, in practice, the beast tide seemed to have no instinct to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. Knowing that the coiling dragon array composed of the 36 flood dragons was a meat grinder, they still risked their lives. Even if they had to sacrifice everything, they had to bite off one of the opponent's scales, injuring it and making it bleed. This kind of valiant fighting style was simply like an irreconcilable hatred, but this was actually just a transfer of the original hatred from the beast tide. Then, as the original target of hatred, what kind of thing had Wang Lu done to make people resentful? A few thoughtful and profound disciples of Spirit Sword sect would inevitably think of this and cast a curious and admiring look at Wang Lu. And Ouyang Shang, who was more thoughtful than these disciples, had already guessed the approach of Wang Lu, so he was not surprised by what he saw. He must have found more inspiration from the invention of the poop-throwing tactic and carried it forward. This must be the reason why the monsters and beasts that were besieging them were so angry that they had lost their minds. If it were a human, if their relatives and children were assassinated or their homes were shat on, they would also feel endless hatred. This method was debatable, but on the other hand, it could be regarded as a good opportunity to reap benefits from others. After this battle, it was expected that the flood dragon of Blessed Fountain would be greatly damaged, but its foundation would not be damaged, and it would still have considerable strength. It was truly a perfect leveling target. The battle between the beast tide and the coiling dragon formation lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. In terms of scale, the beast tide had an absolute crushing advantage, but the second-level flood dragon, as the overlord of this place, had the upper hand in actual combat by virtue of the coiling dragon array. The blood and flesh grinded away the life of the beast tide to its heart's content. The beast tide had the advantage in numbers, but in a situation where they had completely lost their reason, not only they didn't cooperate with each other, they even killed each other. Thus, they couldn't even exert 30% of their strength, so naturally they were not the opponent. 3 days later, the battle had been decided. In the beast tide, all the monsters that were good at fighting had been killed, and the beast tide was no longer able to reverse the situation. Although the coiling dragon array had also suffered heavy losses, it still stood. Witnessing this scene, the beast tide finally regained some of its reason in despair and began to disperse and flee. The flood dragons didn't pursue them, not because they were unwilling but because they couldn't. In these 3 days of fierce battle, although they won, they still lost. It was really a miserable victory. More than half of the 36 dragon sons and grandsons were lost. The second-level flood dragon was seriously injured, one of his dragon beads cracked and one of his eyes was blown out. The overlord of Great Song Mountain Blessed Fountain had at least lost most of its power. In this situation, the flood dragon could not even guarantee that he could face those human cultivators who were once like ants, if they took advantage of the burning house. Fortunately, those human beings did not appear. Until the second-level flood dragon returned to the dragon palace at the bottom of the blessed fountain with his descendants, those human beings did not make a move. Obviously, this was the best opportunity. If they missed this time, they would never have such a good opportunity again. The monsters around Great Song Mountain had been beaten into submission. Their fear and submission to the flood dragon had been thoroughly imprinted in their primordial spirit and bone marrow. It was impossible for them to be incited to let people reap the benefits. As for himself, even if he couldn't fully recover from his injury for a long time, he still had an absolute advantage in strength. With the despicable and shameless nature of human beings, it was really difficult to understand why they would miss this opportunity and not take advantage of it. But they really didn't come. This made the second-level flood dragon in the dragon palace in fear for several days, because he always felt that the human beings would have a more terrible conspiracy waiting for him. It was not until the 5th day that the human conspiracy finally arrived. Reporting to the king, "It's not good." The flood dragon, who was recuperating from his injury, opened his only eye. "What's the matter?" At this time, the flood dragon's mind relaxed a bit. Like a boulder falling to the ground, no matter what the human beings did, at least they made a move. Next, he heard his men say the familiar lines. "They threw sh*t into the water again?" Logically speaking, he should be happy to hear that the opponent used the same trick again. After all, the same trick was used again, which proved that the opponent might be exhausted. However, the flood dragon was not happy at all. It was hard for anyone to be happy when someone threw sh*t in their own house. Last time, the flood dragon dispatched his whole army, which resulted in a world-shaking 3-day war. This time he decided to go out alone. Because his dragon children and grandchildren still needed a long time to fully recover, and he didn't want to end his family line for the sake of a few human cultivators. With the power of those human beings, he could still cope with them alone. When he flew out of the water, more than 30 cultivators of Spirit Sword Sect had been waiting in mid-air for a long time. There was no need for the two sides to talk at all. As soon as they met, they began to fight. This was the first time for the Golden Generation to really implement their own leveling plan. After the previous fierce battle with the Beast Tide, the strength of the Flood Dragon of Blessed Fountain had been greatly reduced. It just so happened that it could bring them great danger, but it would not be fatal. At the same time, the fighting attitude of the Flood Dragon was relatively cautious. Although he hated this group of cultivators, he didn't want to fight to the death with them. Thus, the battle went on without any mishap. The dispersion tactic formulated by Ouyang Shang was a great success. The 37 cultivators of Spirit Sword Sect seemed to be scattered like sand, but in the battle, they unknowingly condensed into a whole. They supported each other and cooperated with each other. The tacit understanding of the dozens of years of cultivation made the process of the battle as smooth as floating clouds and flowing water. The strength of the opponent was obviously overwhelming, but they could not really overwhelm them. Eventually, the battle lasted for a day and a night, and both sides felt exhausted and difficult to continue. At this time, the situation of the Flood Dragon was slightly superior. As a monster, he was born with magical ability, his body was tyrannical, and his resilience was stronger than that of human beings. However, just as he was about to summon his remaining strength to kill the human who had exhausted his magic power, a khaki-colored sword light pinned him firmly on the spot. "Damn it, it's you again?" After a day of fierce fighting, the Flood Dragon could vaguely recognize those tiny human beings. The one who supported the yellow sword light was one of his most hated targets, because this guy had ruined too many of his chances. Although the cooperation of the cultivators of Spirit Sword Sect in the battle was very tacit, it was not flawless. During the whole day of fighting there were many flaws. However, how could the Flood Dragon, as the overlord of this place, not be able to catch it? It was just that, whenever he was ready to attack someone, there would be such a sword light that stopped him, causing his head to bleed. The defensive ability of the non-phase sword had completely exceeded the scope of the King Pill. Perhaps for the second-level Flood Dragon in his heyday, it was nothing to worry about, but there was no way for him to always maintain his peak state under the siege of more than 30 cultivators. The ability of that red and white kid to grasp the opportunity was too strong. Every time the yellow sword light appeared, it was just right, which made him unable to display his strength. And whenever he was ready to change the target and concentrate the firepower on him, there would be another annoying cultivator who would appear and disappear at a ghostly speed, bombarding him indiscriminately, forcing him to divert his attention. Fortunately, the most annoying guy had jumped out to seek his own death. The others had already retreated, leaving him alone. No matter how strong his yellow sword light was, could it be stronger than the sharp teeth of a second-level flood dragon? However, in this desperate situation, that human cultivator actually laughed happily. After waiting for a whole day, I finally found the opportunity to fight you one-on-one. Come, let's have a good time. With that, the yellow sword light dispersed. That human cultivator boldly withdrew the sword of Mount Kuan in his right hand, took half a step forward, and a primal chaos light bloomed in his left palm. The flood dragon was vigilant. He sprayed out a mouthful of stinky poisonous gas from afar, but he didn't come close. Then he rejoiced in his cautiousness. That primal chaos light, in a flash, was bound into a sharp blade, which penetrated the poisonous gas like a hot knife through butter and arrived in front of him. The flood dragon hastily lifted up his scales as a defense. Then the primal chaos sword chi suddenly detonated, which fragmented the dragon's scales. Although the sword chi aftermath was greatly weakened, it still cut his skin and flesh. This made the flood dragon endlessly frightened. If he hadn't chosen to stay away out of caution, the consequences of being hit by such a sword chi would have been unthinkable. After being frightened, he became angry. Therefore, the flood dragon simply sacrificed his inner core, the dragon pearl, and suddenly spat it out from his mouth. Like a cannonball, it shot towards the opponent. This was a very risky move, but it undoubtedly had the effect of getting rid of the opponent once and for all. In the face of such a sharp offensive, the opponent didn't dare to neglect. He retracted the primal chaos sword light and used the sword of Mount Kuan as a symbol of defense to draw an arc. A perfectly round arc with a radius of less than 3 feet, which was one of the strongest defenses he had mastered. 3 feet sword defense. In the next moment, a strong shock wave came from the tip of the sword and instantly engulfed his entire body. The 3 feet sword defense only lasted for a moment before it collapsed. The sword chi that was originally circulating smoothly was shattered, and the 206 sword bones were almost broken into pieces. He himself was sent flying by an irresistible force and disappeared into the dense forest in the blink of an eye. The flood dragon subconsciously wanted to chase after him, but soon stopped. Being bombarded by the dragon pearl head-on, there was no way he could survive. There was no need to take the risk of going deeper. On the other side, in a dilapidated and messy forest, a towering tree slightly swayed. At the root of the tree, the depression caused by the strong impact was clearly visible. In the middle of the depression, a human figure could be vaguely seen, but it was badly mutilated and covered by broken branches, leaves and mud, looking battered and exhausted. Kalala. There was a crisp sound of bones colliding. After a moment, a person stood up from the mess. Although his body was swaying and some of his joints were obviously distorted, he still stood up. The man moved his neck left and right, coughed out blood from his nose, and then stretched himself. Phew, being hit in the face with an egg, this feeling is really King cool. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.